Let's testify, man. Oh God, you've done so much for me. I'm grateful and overwhelmed here at your feet. And I could stay here forever, Lord, but you call me to something more. And I hear you say that you have a plan to use every broken woman and man to display just how good you are. We are your living pieces of art. What good does it do to hide away when all of my scars are a picture of grace? All right. So I will testify of the power of God. I will tell the world of the hope I have found. For my body was broken, my heart was made whole, and that's too good to keep to myself. So I will testify of the power of God. Oh, do you believe it? Has he done it for anyone else? I said, has he done it for anyone else? Cause the God that I serve, he's always at work. Has he done it for anyone else? So come on and testify of the power of God. Come on and tell the world of the hope we have found. For our body was broken, our hearts were made whole, and that's too good to keep to yourself. Come on and testify of the power of God. This is my story, this is my song, praising my Savior all the day long. I'm gonna testify. Somebody testify your voice. This is my. So I'm gonna testify. Somebody testify. Come on, take it out. Jesus, my champion, the victor of grace, the only one worthy of all of my praise. Yeah. So come on and testify. Oh, somebody lift him high. Come on, testify of the power of God. I will tell the world of the hope I have found. Oh, for my body was broken, my heart was made whole, and that's too good to keep to myself. So I will testify of the power of God. Sing that. Oh, my body was broken, my heart was made whole, and that's too good to keep to myself. So I will testify of the power of God. Oh, let's do that right now, Murfreesboro.
And good morning. I hope you are doing well. Bradley, I see you there in the chat. Anybody else that joins in as we go on, welcome. So, obviously, the title of this live stream is me being a little bit snarky. The thing about it is that, it's been a little bit of an ongoing theme with my Sunday morning streams the last few weeks. This whole myth, and hey, Multi Gunman's in the house too. Good to see you, buddy. This whole myth that there's this inherent conflict between science and uh, Christianity in particular, and religion in general, but Christianity in particular. And it is a myth. There's really no conflict there. I know people want there to be sometimes, but it's just not there. And I forgot. I want to start the timer because I don't want to run late today because I got such a late start and I got driving to do and all that. All right. So one thing that Professor John Lennox talks about sometimes. He's a mathematician at Oxford University, but he's also a theologian of sorts, and he likes to talk about the idea that if I asked you why the water was boiling, that a physicist could explain to me about thermodynamics and the transfer of temperature and all this stuff, and get to the point of why the water boils. He said, or I could say I had a hankering for a cup of hot tea, right? Is either of those explanations incorrect? Obviously, no. Do either of those explanations compete with each other? And again, the answer is no. But are both explanations completely true? And the answer is, well, yes, assuming that he actually does want some tea. And I think, and so that's why, obviously, a kind of a play on that is the name of this very live stream, because yes, we constantly hear, Christians in particular want to, oh, Jesus is the reason for the season, kind of thing. Well, okay, Jesus is the reason we celebrate Christmas, sure, but Jesus isn't necessarily the cause of winter, at least not as a process is concerned, and that would be more due to the 23-degree tilt on the Earth's axis that gives us the seasonal changes that we experience. And I just thought I would have a little fun with that. However, I mean, honestly, to say Jesus is the reason for the season is completely true if you're talking about the Christmas season. And if you will say the tilt on the axis of the Earth is the reason for the season because you're talking about winter as opposed to summer, that is also true. So, yeah. All right, so to the chat we go, see whatever you guys have to say for a little while before we wrap it up. And yeah, one other thing I do want to touch on, and there will be. I don't know what Mr. Know-It-All had a situation this last Friday. I'll let him talk about it if he wants to, but hopefully he'll be here this coming Friday. But there will not be a Tuesday night live stream this week. And the reason, I'm going to be totally selfish, but, crucify me if you must. But this Tuesday is my lovely wife's and my 32nd wedding anniversary. And so I'm going to be spending the evening with her, not with you guys. So sorry, guys. But yeah, 32 is a lot of years. So, going to be celebrating that with the wife. Anyway, now to the chat we go. Well, Multi Gunman says, good to see you too. Thank you, sir. Street Preacher is in the house. Good to see you, Stan. And says, missed the overture. I'm sorry. And Robert says, shalom today. Shalom, shalom, Robert. And then, anyway, to fit that Doom mask on Herbie. Now, I suppose I could try, but I don't think that it would quite work. Maybe when I get to print, I'll print a Doom Herbie one. I'll print a replacement head for Herbie that has the Doctor Doom mask. How's that? Let's see. Bradley says scientists keep discovering new forms of life that in the past they would have sworn couldn't possibly exist. So science still has a lot to learn. Well, I'll say this is that if you ask any true scientist, and I'm not necessarily talking about, you know, I would say number one, to kind of say what is a true scientist. You know, I know no true Scotsman, blah blah blah, but a true scientist, I would say, someone who is at the doctorate level of a given field of science, and not, and I would also go so far as to say, not necessarily a person who simply works in a scientific field. So, for example, a medical doctor it has a PhD in medicine, but a medical doctor that's a general practitioner, I wouldn't really classify as a scientist. They're not out there actually, using the scientific method to come up with hypotheses and theories and stuff like that. Instead, they're using the information that other scientists have gathered in order to properly diagnose whatever your particular illness or ailment might be. Now, there is some use of the scientific method there, but I wouldn't necessarily say, well, that's a scientist. I think of people who are actually actively contributing to the field of science that we are talking about. But anyway, but if you were to ask any real scientist about how much do we know about a given topic, and it really doesn't matter, you could be talking about chemistry, biology, cosmology, you know, whatever field you want to talk about. The one consistent answer you should get for any intelligent scientist is how we really don't know squat. The it's amazing. Like, there's a lot of neat stuff we know about the universe if you get into cosmology, right? There is a lot of neat stuff, but there is much, much more that we don't know than what we do. And in fact, just knowing that we don't know, even raises the question about, well, what about things that we don't know that we don't know, right? So, and there are things that, like, and I really hate, it's an overused term as far as argumentation when people try to, again, propagate the myth that there's some kind of conflict between science and religion. But when people say, oh, it's only a theory, right? Well, to say something is only a theory is to not really understand what the term theory means. However, on the opposite side of the spectrum, you have people that think that if it is a well founded theory, that means it is a fact. But that's not the case either. Because for example, when it comes to astronomy and cosmology stuff, which is more where my interest and knowledge tends to lie. If you were to say, well, what is the composition of the sun, right? Well, the there's it's I'm oversimplifying here for the sake of conversation, but the primary ingredient of the sun would be hydrogen. Well, how do you know that the primary ingredient of the sun is hydrogen? Well, you can say, well, the main way that we know is the fact that if you take sunlight and you put it through a prism and you look at the color spectrum, it has the clear markers of hydrogen. And now, how do we know that? Because here on Earth, when we experiment with different chemical compositions and basically like burning them and stuff to create light, we can see that different chemical substances absorb different parts of the full spectrum. And depending on what sections are absorbed would tell you what is there, you know. So if I have a pure, 100% pure beam of light coming towards you, and in between that beam of light and you is a cloud of hydrogen, then a certain frequencies of light will be impeded by that hydrogen. And so then if you were able to look at the spectrum of light by running that light through a prism, you would see little sections that are missing from the light spectrum due to the hydrogen absorbing that. And so we've been able to very accurately chart all these different chemical compositions that absorb different frequencies of light. And so we use that to basically analyze what the chemical composition of a star is. So, and in fact, one interesting thing is that in using this particular technique, a second compound of the sun was discovered, but it was something that we didn't have as far as on Earth. So we would look at, okay, we see this one marker is clearly hydrogen, but what's this other thing, right? And this other thing is, you know, a little bit different from hydrogen. They were trying to figure it out, and so someone basically said, okay, well, whatever that substance is, since it comes from the sun, I'm going to name this new substance after the sun and call it helium. And so helium was a theoretical substance that we derived from analyzing sunlight before we actually discovered helium. So there's definitely some there's some basis to say that, yeah, this stuff has some merit to it, but you're still making some fundamental assumptions, right? And don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to pick holes on the idea that the sun is made of hydrogen, but I want to just, when we talk about how much we don't know, in order to come up with that conclusion that the sun is hydrogen, we have to assume that in fact, hydrogen is the only substance that leaves those particular markers in the light spectrum. We would also have to assume that the combination of the hydrogen and helium markers isn't actually some different substance that has both of those markers in it. Or we would have to assume that there's not something in between us and the sun that we simply can't detect as of right now that's absorbing part of the light. Which is kind of funny because now scientists are frantically looking for invisible, non-reactive matter, called dark matter. So you have to make a whole lot of fundamental assumptions in order to come to the conclusion that the sun is in fact primarily made of hydrogen. However, the evidence is overwhelmingly strong that the sun is made out of hydrogen, but that evidence is all based on our understanding of, basically you have to take in the Copernican principle. Which, in simple terms, the Copernican principle is that there's nothing special about where we are. And I think there are times when that makes sense. There are times when it doesn't make sense to invoke the Copernican principle. But the idea here is that if there's nothing special about Earth as opposed to any other location in the universe, then that would mean that the basic chemicals and atoms that we find on Earth would be the same as the chemicals and atoms that we would find scattered about the entirety of the universe. And so, as opposed to the idea that, well, here on Earth we have this periodic table of elements, but in actuality, if you were to go to the sun, it's a totally different periodic table. And if you were to go to Jupiter, it would be a different one than that. And if you were to go, so that would be very problematic for science. Because one of the most fundamental assumptions of science is that the universe is consistent. Because if the universe is not consistent, well, then we can make zero predictions about what's out there. The funny thing is that in the quest to try to create conflict between science and religion, many in science try to come up with ways to explain the universe without a creator. And in many times, these various explanations require that you say, well, the rules weren't always the same. And so when the rules were different, that's when X happened. So when they try to explain things like creation ex nihilo man, I can't pronounce anything today, but something from nothing, more or less, trying to suggest that where did existence come from, or when you start talking about like abiogenesis, the origin of life, they say, well, the rules are the rules now, but 50 million years ago they were a little different. And you can't do that. You can't change the rules from one time period to another just to suit your theories unless you have some kind of strong evidence that physical laws in some way were different, which, as far as I know, we don't have any evidence of that. But yeah, the more, I like Neil deGrasse Tyson, I think, put it well, and where he's saying that as you progress through your education and you become better versed in all there is to know about physics, he said the greatest moment is when you reach that point when you've amassed enough knowledge to think that you're right, but to know that you're wrong. And that sounds silly, but it actually makes a lot of sense. And that, once you realize that, hey, the universe, we are, everything that we know about the universe on larger scales is wrong. But we're trying to get closer. And as an example, we can look at relativity, right? Relativity is probably one of the best tested scientific theories in the modern era. And we've done a bazillion tests as far as, the effects of gravity and time and stuff like that, based on position and motion. And it's always come to fit Einstein's formulas, which is great for the accuracy of relativity. But we also know that relativity is wrong. There are certain points in relativity where you have to invoke the not number infinity in order to deal with certain problems. Well, that in and of itself shows that the theory in and of itself is incomplete at best. And it's not entirely compatible with other uh, physical theories that we know withstand rigorous testing, like quantum mechanics. It's really interesting. Quantum mechanics and relativity both appear to be correct, but quantum mechanics and relativity cannot both be correct because they kind of contradict each other. So, what's the answer to that? Well, some people will call it quantum gravity. Some people will call it gut theory or grand unified theory, whatever. But we don't know. We don't have that theory yet. We have various ideas on. We know some things on what that theory would have to have in it, but we haven't quite worked it out. And so there's a Nobel Prize waiting for the person who actually can come up with a grand unified theory that works. But yeah, I mean, Einstein, all these various theories, particularly when we get to cosmology, my favorite field of study, they're all approximations. And we know they're approximations because none of them are perfect. Which is one thing I think is kind of funny in that scientists, particularly physicists, will sometimes suggest something to the effect of mathematics is the language of God, right? Or sometimes if they want to try to be less theistic about it, they'll say, mathematics is the language of the universe. But if that were true, then why is it that our math is woefully from all we can see, incapable of devising a theory that is 100% correct? You would think that if the universe was in fact mathematical in nature, as many in science try to suggest, you would think that then a mathematical formula should be able to explain this stuff without any error. But so far, that's not true. Even theories like relativity have their problems that we cannot solve as of yet. So, anyway, that's a very long winded answer. And Stan says that's embarrassing, poor dog. Yeah, she's not a big fan of the shirts, but it's that time of year where she needs to be dressed warmly to keep her from freezing since she's a Chihuahua. Man, let's see. Well, the alien Hail Mary has mercury for blood. Well, that see, don't get me wrong. I'm sure, and I'm looking forward to seeing Hail Mary when it comes out. But that seems like it would be highly unlikely. But what's interesting is like if you want to talk about aliens that make sense as far as non-humanoid aliens, that you want to make them as alien as possible, but also have them make logical sense as far as science is concerned. You should go back to Star Trek: The Original Series in the episode "The Devil in the Dark." The Horta, the whole point of Spock's whole thesis about the Horta is that unlike every other life form that they've ever encountered, the Horta is not based on carbon but on silicon. And the interesting thing is that a lot of scientists actually believe that if we were to find life based on an element other than carbon, it would most likely have to be silicon. So, just kind of interesting. And Multigoma says, "Happy anniversary! Thank you, my friend. Looking forward to it. We're going to go see a fine movie for our anniversary. We're going to go see SpongeBob." And I know some of you are probably thinking, well, why not go see Avatar? Well, because we saw Avatar yesterday. And I was really, or not yesterday, the day before. And I was really hoping to be able to talk about it Friday night on Nerd Fights, but Mr. Know-It-All canceled at the last minute, which made me want to punch Mr. Know-It-All, but I totally understand why. But yeah, so we saw Avatar already, so we're going to see SpongeBob for our anniversary. Suggested there could be life on planets where we assume life could exist. Well, yeah, that's one funny thing about the search for extraterrestrial life is that we assume that life would have to be similar to us in most respects. So, carbon based, needs liquid water, needs oxygen, all that stuff. And we don't know that that's true. I mean, if there's life out there, who's to say that there couldn't be some kind of life that lives floating around in the atmosphere of Jupiter, right? And I think that it's one of those things that atheists frequently will try to suggest that the lack of hard evidence for God is evidence that God does not exist. Well, then I would turn that around and say, well, then the lack of hard evidence of extraterrestrial life means that there is no extraterrestrial life, which I don't know that that's true. I'm just saying that absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, and it cuts both ways. I do think though that it does seem, at least from the various environments that we have available to see within our solar system and the limited exploration of our solar system we've done so far, it does seem that life is a fairly rare occurrence. Because if life could exist on any planet that has the sufficient conditions that we merit as being necessary, like liquid water, oxygen, in the atmosphere, that kind of stuff. Well, then, by all means, when the first Viking probe landed on Mars, we should have seen hard evidence for the existence of at least past life on Mars, from when Mars had a thicker atmosphere. But we don't. We don't. You know, we people have said, "Oh, well, we found microbes on Mars." No, we have not. We have not found anything. But trust me, if we found conclusive evidence that there was life on Mars, every scientist would be talking about it. But we haven't. It's just like when they sample I can't remember what it was called, but they sampled some comet and they found some amino acids on the comet. And they were saying, see, that's proof that life exists everywhere. And it's like, no, it's not. At best, you could argue that it's proof that amino acids exist everywhere, but that doesn't necessarily mean that life exists. And people say, "Well, it gives you the ingredients of life." Well, great, but if I take all the ingredients of a human being, so a few gallons of water, some carbon, all the various elements of the human body, and I threw them into a vat and mixed them up, they are not going to just become a human. That's not how life works, right? And even if you wanted to get more simplistic about it and take some basic amino acids, and hey, I'll even give you this. Let's even throw in a couple of DNA molecules just for fun. And you stir it up in a vat, it's not going to suddenly become life. That's not how it works. Robert says, "Solid Trekker, so are the supposed Avengers Doomsday trailer on YouTube legit or just something just made up?" Okay, so I did see the Captain America Doomsday trailer that was attached to Avatar: Fire and Ash, and it was I've watched one or two videos about the trailer. I haven't seen if anybody's actually posted the actual trailer, and if they have, I'm sure it's a bootleg. But the trailer is not particularly exciting. It doesn't tell you anything about the story, but I actually thought it was a good trailer. The trailer just basically shows Peggy Carter's home, and a motorcycle pulls up. Then a helmet is placed on the handlebars of the motorcycle by an unseen person. And then this same unseen person puts away the Captain America uniform from Avengers Endgame and puts it in a dresser drawer. And then they show a man holding a baby, and as the camera pans up, you finally see the man's face, and it's Steve Rogers holding a baby, which would be safe to assume that that is Steve Rogers' kid. And then it cuts to black, and it says that doesn't say Captain America, it says Steve Rogers will return in Avengers Doomsday. And then a ticking clock for Doomsday, showing that it's currently 11 months, however many days, however many hours, however many minutes, however many seconds, because Doomsday comes out next December. And so, it was just confirmation that yes, Cap, or at least Steve Rogers, will be in Avengers Doomsday. But that's all it really tells you. Other than that, it doesn't tell you anything about the story. We don't even know if Steve's kid is going to be part of the story or not. People are making all sorts of big, wild assumptions about it. But I say we'll see when it comes out. I'm very much looking forward to Doomsday, and we'll see what happens. Now, the frustrating thing about all this is that there's supposedly 4 different trailers that are going to be attached to Avatar, one trailer coming out each week, which means that what they want you to do is to go see Avatar every weekend in order to see all 4 versions of the trailer. And I don't want to do that, right? I'm not going to go, because first of all, Avatar ain't that good. So, I mean, yeah, just not going to happen. So I'll probably wait and see, when I'm sure that Marvel will eventually release the trailers online. The one with Steve Rogers riding a bike in his house, holding the baby is real. Yeah. Anything else is fake. Well, not necessarily. It just means that anything else may or may not be a leak. But the only one that's confirmed is the Steve Rogers one because that's the only one that's actually out right now. The supposed Thor one would be coming out, I assume, on like Thursday of this week. Thanks for letting me know that. Bradley says, like the recent discoveries about Jupiter made scientists completely rethink how gas giants form. I don't know specifically what recent discoveries you're talking about Jupiter, but there's a lot about the solar system. I mean, it's kind of funny because we assume that our solar system is just the way that all solar systems are, but we don't know. And that's just it. And this is where I think the Copernican principle breaks down about this not being a particularly special place. It makes sense when you start talking about like the existence of various elements and stuff like that. Where I don't think it makes sense is to necessarily suggest that there are planets like Earth in the proper position with the proper chemical composition to produce life all over the galaxy and further all over the universe. We don't know that. So far we have not found any solar systems that really match ours. We've found a few rocky planets that could be in the habitable zone of a star, but even that is, you have to understand that you see these wonderful pictures on various documentaries showing these beautiful pictures of various planets around the universe that we found, and the truth is we have no idea what these planets actually look like. We what we do is we base the size of the and density of the planet on the wobble and dimming effect of a star when the planet is in between us and the star, and the wobble based on the planet's orbit around the star. But it's not, we don't have a lot of conclusive evidence. If basically all the planets that we found so far have been giants, either rocky giants or gas giants. And there's a reason for that because our technology is still very primitive. And so it's hard for us to be sure what we're looking at yet. And the funny thing is, even within our solar system, it's there's a whole lot we don't know about Jupiter, Saturn, Neptune, Uranus. Love that one. As I just love the Futurama thing. Is that it's so immature for people to get all giggly about Uranus, and so they renamed the planet to Eurectum. But yeah. And apparently there's a Thor one where he's talking, praying to his father Odin. Haven't seen that anywhere yet, though. Yeah, I don't know. I would say the Thor stuff I would take with a grain of salt, at least until next weekend. We know a very tiny percentage about the universe, and we're still claimed to be 100% correct. Well, that is a problem. But I would also throw that at theology. That's about the same as a percentage of what we really know about God. But boy, are there a lot of Christians that claim to have all the knowledge, right? Now, you can say with a fairly highly confident voice of what is in the Bible, right? You can say, okay, well, the Bible says that we ought to do this or we ought not to do that, right? However, we don't, when you start having churches like the Catholic Church and the doctrine of the Trinity, they suggest that if you don't adhere to the doctrine of the Trinity, that you are somehow that you're going to hell or that you're a heretic or whatever. And it's like, we don't really understand how God works, right? So the Trinity is as good of an explanation as we've got right now, but you don't need to throw it out there like the Trinity is a sacred concept, because the Trinity itself is nowhere to be found in the Bible. And so let's take a chill pill and understand that we may never understand really how God works, what God is, and that's okay. The it makes it difficult when you're having these discussions, especially with non-believers, about the existence of God, because you can't. I don't know if God is a being of pure energy or if God has some kind of physical form. It would seem like he's something different than anything we've ever encountered, because we do know, in order to be God, he would have to be able to exist outside of space and time, which is heavily suggested by what's in the scriptures about him. But aside from the fact that he's very powerful and exists outside of what we call space time, there's not a lot that we know about his nature. Nature meaning physical nature, as opposed to his attitudes on certain things. He tries to make clear through his word. And Robert says, right to Street Preacher, I'm not sure about what, because we don't have access to all the variables. Well, we don't, and we never will, at least not in the foreseeable future. Like, we are definitely generations away from ever being able to collect a sample of the sun and then test its chemical composition, right? We can't do that. All we can do right now is make the assumption that all of what we suggest about various light spectra and stuff are correct, and therefore our assumptions about the sun's composition is also correct. Yeah. I think we could learn stuff, but every time we find the key to the box is full of more stuff we didn't know about. Yep, that is very true. In fact, I remember when Voyager was first, hitting other planets back when I was younger, and the scientists would talk about the fact that, man, every time Voyager answers a question, it brings up 10 more. Because there's just so much mystery out there. Stan says, there are additional things that we just don't have any method to sense yet. Well, the funny thing about saying stuff like that is that, I've confronted people on the idea, like, when they say, "Wow, what is the spirit? What is the soul? What is all this stuff that you claim to have all this knowledge of?" And it's like, hey, are you trying to tell me that we actually 100% understand all the fundamental forces of nature? Because I don't think we do. I think there's at least one major thing that we have yet to discover that's all around us as like a fundamental force or something like that. All right. Dan Monroe uploaded a video yesterday about 2001: A Space Odyssey. It is the best sci-fi movie of all time, though. I would strongly disagree with that. I do not think that 2001: A Space Odyssey is the best sci-fi movie of all time. I don't really know if I have a clear-cut winner for that. I'd have to think about every science fiction movie I've ever seen, which there's been a lot. But 2001: A Space Odyssey, it has some serious pacing issues, does not have a particularly compelling story, and in fact, the beginning of the movie, the first 20 minutes or so, where we're looking at all the ape people first developing tools and then killing other apes, has nothing to do with the rest of the movie, right? Other than the fact that it shows the first step in the evolutionary chain that led to man. It doesn't really like there's nothing about Dr. Haywood Floyd. There's nothing about the development of the HAL 9000. There's nothing about space travel at all. There's nothing about Jupiter specifically, other than the fact that we see a monolith, but we don't know what that is at that point. So I think that 2001: A Space Odyssey is an interesting film. It's got some big ideas, but would I call it the greatest sci-fi movie of all time? No, because it's also boring as all heck. It's it can be difficult to watch because it's so boring. It makes Star Trek: The Motion Picture look like a fast-paced adventure. You know. Stan says, because we're looking for oxygen, liquid water, etc. Well, we should be, because that's what all life that we know of requires. And so, the problem is, okay, there could be life based on just about everything, but the only life we know about is life that can exist on Earth. And all life on Earth requires a few basic things. And liquid water is extraordinarily important for life on Earth, for all life on Earth. And so, if all life is like even vaguely like life on Earth, then it would stand to reason that all life would require oxygen, liquid water, etc. These things are made of something metallic, which surface or pressure of Venus, water, oceans, 200 degrees. Are you talking about the aliens in that movie? Or, well, you've read the book. I've heard that the Odyssey prologue was pretty good. I would strongly disagree with that. I think the Odyssey prologue, I mean, it's beautifully shot, but I wouldn't call it particularly good. The funny thing is that the year that movie came out, and if you haven't seen 2001: A Space Odyssey, at least watch the first 20 minutes of the film, and you'll understand why this is so stupid. So, 2001: A Space Odyssey came out same year as Planet of the Apes, and Planet of the Apes won the Best Makeup Academy Award, beating out 2001: A Space Odyssey. Now, the funny thing is, the reason that 2001: A Space Odyssey did not get the makeup award is because the makeup was too good. And when I say that, it's because when they looked at the footage of the ape men, or the proto men, first start using tools in the first 20 minutes of the movie, a lot of the critics and stuff actually just assumed that those were trained apes as opposed to guys in costumes. So yeah, a lot of people didn't realize that you're looking at makeup, and because it looked really good. Does the time span work out for the baby to become Doctor Doom? Oh, for Steve Rogers' kid to be Doctor Doom? I suppose that could be. Like, if you're thinking that the little baby that Rogers is holding will grow up to be Victor Von Doom, it wouldn't quite look like Robert Downey Jr. unless there's a time jump that we don't know about. Because Robert Downey Jr.'s Tony Stark is younger than me, born in the 1970s. And you can get that from Avengers Endgame. But at least the last we saw of Steve Rogers and Peggy Carter, they were living together in the 1940s or early 50s. And if that's the time frame, well, then that's still 20 years too early to really be the Tony Stark we know and love. But it could still be a Tony Stark that's older, or it could be a Tony Stark that was just happens to be born 20 years earlier. We don't know. What year would he have gone back to start his romantic relationship with Peggy? Yeah, that's the thing. I think he would go back to the late 1940s. So it doesn't make a lot of sense. that he would be that would be Doctor Doom. That being said, I do. Here's it's so tired. My own personal theories on Doctor Doom is that I think that Doctor Doom was created inadvertently by Steve Rogers. And so that's one of the reasons is, I think Steve will be involved in the story, and that Doom will particularly have a grudge against the old school Avengers. So here's what here's my little theory: is that okay? We know Steve at the end, and they do say this is going to be a direct sequel to Avengers Endgame, so I think this kind of fits. So at the end of Endgame, Steve goes back to return the Infinity Stones to their rightful places in history, and then he finally ends up going back to, you know, the just after World War II, in order to reunite with his love, Peggy Carter, and live out a life with her. However, even though he wants to live out a happy life with Peggy Carter, he's still Steve Rogers. And so he's a super soldier, and he is a person of deep moral conviction who knows full well some of the terrible things that are going to happen. So what if he then tries to take a few steps to prevent some bad things from happening, right? Now, if you were able to prevent a lot of the various conflicts that happen around the world post World War II, then by the time you got to the mid 1960s, the world would be something of a utopia. And so I think what Steve did was he kind of created the 828 universe, or the universe that the Fantastic Four are in. Because keep in mind, in Fantastic Four, the world is something of a utopia. The Fantastic Four have basically solved all the world's problems. What we may not know is that, there was, in fact, a little bit of help from Steve Rogers. And so this causes, the world to basically become this utopian vision. And everybody loves it except for Victor Von Doom, which, of course, we saw that hinted at in the Fantastic Four movie, in that Latveria is the only country that refused to take part in the Freedom Foundation's work to make world peace. Now, another interesting thing is that Doom and Tony Stark's personalities are basically the same. And so it wouldn't be hard to manipulate a Tony Stark variant into becoming Doctor Doom. If you think about this, is that Tony believed in total security, and as he said in Avengers Endgame, regardless of whether or not it got in the way of your precious little freedoms. In other words, he thinks that security is more important than personal freedom and liberty. And he also, he has no problem with building entire fleets of robots to do his dirty work, as we saw with the Iron Legion in Age of Ultron. And, he believed that it was his duty to protect the world. And in fact, as he said, he wanted to build a suit of armor around the planet. Now, you combine all that, and what if Tony took a little bit of a turn for the worse and became a bad person? And because of that, he wanted to use his abilities to gain absolute power in order to completely reshape and control the universe, because that's the only way that the universe could truly be happy, is if Doom were ruling it. And so how can he do that? Well, since he's in the 828 universe, when Galactus shows up, Doom is, of course, while not present for the fight, he's no doubt observing it from Latveria. And Galactus is a very impressive force that Reed and company make disappear through the portal. But does that mean that Franklin, since Franklin is the whole target for Galactus, and Doom would see that because I mean, heck, the Fantastic Four even made a press conference in the movie talking about how Galactus wanted their baby. So Doom can put two and two together and figure out that Franklin Richards is the super uber powerful being that he is, and so he gets Franklin Richards to give Doom access to that power and in order to make the world a better place. And Doom then uses that power to reshape the entire multiverse into his image, and that will set up for Secret Wars. Anyway, just a few thoughts. Well, it's unprecedented. Remember, people paying to see different movies just to watch the Phantom Menace trailer. That's true. And they'll just walk in and out and not watch the movie. Well, that's honestly, if I had time to kill, I might consider getting a ticket to because since I have the subscription, it wouldn't cost me anything. But like getting a ticket to an Avatar movie and then just going in, watching the trailer, and then leaving, and doing that every week for the next few weeks. Was 2010: A Space Odyssey a better movie than 2001: A Space Odyssey? Ooh, tough one. In some ways, yes, absolutely. 2010 was a better paced story. It was definitely better acted, and it was a more exciting story for sure. I think 2001 had some bigger ideas in it than 2010, but 2010 was a much more entertaining movie. So, where in all the things that 2001 failed at, 2010 excelled at. But 2010, the opposite is also true. The things that 2001 were great at, namely high concept sci fi ideas, 2010 kind of lacks. Because while there is some of the same stuff that was in the first one, it's just a rehash of what was in the first one. So, yeah, not exactly original, but interesting. To be honest, I don't want to know a whole lot about Uranus. Wait, what? Yeah, well, that's okay. I don't plan on telling you a lot about my anus. But the planet Erectum we'll talk about. Speaking of Doomsday, if Doomsday got into the Marvel Universe, would they even stand a chance against Doomsday? Oh, Doomsday is in the DC villain Doomsday. Yes. I think that the Marvel heroes would actually be able to fairly quickly dispatch Doomsday. Let's see. Darkseid wasn't even able to defeat Doomsday. Well, Darkseid is a wuss. Yeah, but Doomsday, the funny thing is, like, I mean, I know that there are different iterations of Doomsday, and most of what I know is based on the original concept of Doomsday. And you know what? Doomsday never fought in, at least in the original Death of Superman run, Doomsday didn't fight anybody with any kind of psychic powers. And I would think that that would be something he couldn't really handle. But I don't know. Let's see. Gorilla says, "Kapla! I'll only be lurking. I'm laying down because the way my chest feels makes me want to take a toaster bath." Oh, I'm sorry, buddy. Yeah, get some rest. Let's see. Like we can't even see people's auras. Okay. Thought they used real apes. They did. And granted, like I mean, we can look back and laugh and say, "Haha, they're so dumb," but at the same time, compare the 8 men from 2001: A Space Odyssey to anything else you've seen in 1968 or prior. And it's not even close. It's so good. So I would dare say it makes sense that it fooled the people of the Academy. Trust says, good day, everyone. Merry Christmas. Space Odyssey 2010. Way better than 2001. Well, definitely more entertaining. Street Preacher says, and that one wasn't directed by Kubrick. No, it was not. And I think Kubrick is an overrated director. Just like I think James Cameron is. Sorry for those fanboys of James Cameron, but I think James Cameron is a lousy writer and a average director. But he's great with visuals. That's what James Cameron is an absolute genius when it comes to visuals. While you gone, I've made I million views on my channel. Okay. Well, good to see you, Godson. And you're saying you got 1 million views on your channel? Very good. So you're gonna like give me all your money then? So that would be nice. Just saying. So now you gotta make me want to look. Okay, so we go at and let's see. All right, guys. Let's see. You have 38 subscribers. So I don't think you have 1 million. Messing with the timeline in a major way is a very bad thing to do. It's a timey-wimey thing after all. Yes. And we kind of saw some of the consequences of messing with the timeline in Avengers Endgame. Flamethrower versus freeze ray. Well, that's tough, Josiah, because flamethrowers are real and freeze rays are not. But in principle, a freeze ray would basically just remove heat, where a flamethrower burns. And so I would have to give it to the flamethrower. I've made a children's book. I just need a publisher and artist. Oh, very cool. Hope it sells a bazillion copies. Just try and keep it somewhat clean. It's terrible of you. Nobody wants to picture that. I don't know what that is, and I don't think I want to know what that is. It's nothing bad. Pro wrestling thing. Oh, pro wrestling ill. You ever watch The Peak Blinders? I don't know what that is. Gilligan versus Dr. Evil. That's an interesting matchup because both are, for the most part, incompetent. But Gilligan has more of a track record of success than Dr. Evil for sure. So in that respect, I'd have to give it to Gilligan. But Gilligan's not a killer, and Dr. Evil would have no problems in killing Gilligan. So that would be a point to Dr. Evil. So it's really hard to officially give a number, but I'm going to assume that Dr. Evil has access to all his evil stuff, and that would include guns, and Gilligan doesn't have that. So I'll give it to Dr. Evil. I meant the Peaky Blinders. Well, I still don't know what that is. Can we all agree Michael a funny guy? Well, of course we can all agree on that because I'm awesome. Let's see. And how much of the change in Earth's tilt do they say would make our life impossible? I'm not sure. But we wouldn't have the seasons the way they are with a fairly small change in the tilt. And if we didn't have the seasons the way that they are, human life never would have taken root. Because, in all probability, like if the seasons were a little more consistent, like if there was no tilt on the axis, so it would just always be like springtime or fall time, depending on how you look at it. It would well, actually, it would be like the summer equinox all the time. Well, not the summer equinox, but the oh gosh, what's one in between the equinoxes? I always forget. But anyway, it would be halfway in between the summer and the winter equinoxes, to where the day and night cycle are each 12 hours long. I as far as people argue about whether or not life on Earth would have evolved if you had slightly changed anything, and there may be truth to that. But the thing is that if that is true, I think that again, it's something that only God Himself could do, but it's not something that we like to talk about. And I know that was probably weird. Well, it seems being forced to live in harsh, climate tends to initiate technological innovation. Yeah, because if you live in a warm, temperate, or not temperate, but like tropical climate, like you see a lot of Africa and South America, then the technology isn't necessary to survive. So there's no pressure to develop it. Killer clowns versus Martians from Mars attacks. Well, if you're talking about the killer clowns from outer space, they would definitely win. Johnny Shredder says, if the Earth were just a wee bit closer, a wee bit further away from the sun. Well, the funny thing is that the Earth is not technically in the habitable zone. The reason that Earth is as comfortable as it is because we have just the right amount of reflectivity and greenhouse effect to allow for the Earth to be habitable despite being outside of the habitable zone. All that being said, I think that so we say, well, if the Earth was a little closer, a little further away, it wouldn't be able to be populated. Well, that's assuming that everything else stayed the same. If the Earth were a little bit further away, but the Earth's surface was a little bit less reflective and there was a little bit stronger greenhouse effect, there'd be no change. If the Earth was a little bit closer, but the surface of the Earth was a little more reflective and there was a little less greenhouse effect, same thing. So I think that when we think about the habitable zone, that in and of itself is kind of a misleading idea because whether or not a planet could be habitable, and what we generally see as habitable means that liquid water could occur on the surface of the planet. But if if that's the only definition, well, then Europa is habitable because there's liquid water on Europa. So if it's just a matter of liquid water being a thing, I think that you have to be careful of that because there are a lot of ways that liquid water can exist on a planet other than just direct sunlight. Oh, man, I am so groggy today. As a reason whether Europe seems to have advanced faster other places to the equator. Oh, yeah, you continue on the thought from earlier. Robert says, man, Trump is such an insensitive person, and but also he just recently, when asked about the Reiner's murder, he just tripled down on what he said about it already. I did not hear that. I posted on Facebook and I talked a little bit about how disgusted I was with his Truth Social post about the Reiner's murder. And now, I mean, the whole JFK Memorial Center being renamed the Trump and JFK Memorial Center. And I know people say, well, but it was the board of the Memorial Center that voted the name change. You can't tell me that the board of the John F. Kennedy Memorial Center for the Arts just spontaneously decided, you know what we need? We need to add Donald Trump's name to the front of the place. I'm sorry. I don't buy that for a second because there'd be no reason to do that. And, you know, if yeah, it just doesn't make sense. And Trump is hardly the person that you would think of when you think of the performing arts, except for the fact that maybe because he was a television personality. But yeah, black bear versus boxer. A bear, definitely. Though Nick Reiner's bond has been rescinded recently, at least. I didn't hear about that. But look, I'm not worried about how much the bond is or anything like that. You know, as far if I don't know what the deal is as far as his plea or what's going to happen with him. You know, I would prefer that he just pleads guilty and gets it over with, but we'll see. That's the entire plot of Hail Mary. It's Earth is cooling, and they have to figure out a way and how to stop it from becoming uninhabitably cold. No spoilers. Well, yeah, that's all in the trailer. Tony the Tiger versus Mr. Clean. Oh, Tony the Tiger, absolutely, because he's a tiger. Mr. Clean's just a dude. He's a very clean dude, but he's just a dude. Figured Trump could just leave it alone now. He could, but he won't. Not surprising, though, Trump has always wanted to put his name on everything. Yeah, I mean, he does. But I mean, what's next? Are we going to suddenly, is Washington, D.C. going to be renamed to Trump land? You know, the world needs warrior kings. You say so? The craziest thing is those new plagues are in half. The crazier thing is if those new plaques in the on the Hall of Presidents are, yeah, that's, oh geez, yeah, where he basically insults all the presidents except for himself, you know. And they say, well, you know, what he said is true. And it's like, well, yeah, if you want to pick the worst thing about everybody, you could say something bad about anybody. You know, that doesn't make it okay. You know, the point of the dedication plaques and something like that is not to highlight what you didn't like about the person, unless you're just a jerk. Um, have you heard about the hypothesis that the sun may be made of ice? I don't get it. I have never heard of a hypothesis that the sun could be made of ice, and that wouldn't make a lick of sense because the sun is actually made primarily of hydrogen plasma, in my understanding. So, yeah, ice would not make much sense at all. And slash dot dash over 3 years and $150, still no ship. You know, slash, I love you, buddy, but you didn't listen before, so I'm not going to try to re-explain now. They're very passive aggressive towards Obama, and I can't believe the autopin picture for Biden is real or AI. Yeah, the whole thing I think is just kind of messed up. I don't understand why. Look, I get that if you like Trump and you like his policies and all that, that's fine. I'm not going to argue with you on that. But if you want to say that that kind of behavior is fitting of the president of the United States, I mean, I'm sorry. You know, it is a crime in the United States military to have conduct unbecoming of an officer. Trump is that in spades. Here, all who miss from chat, Penny, Alex, Bogey, Darren, Darth. Well, huh? Here's all who miss from chat, Penny, Alex, Bogey, Darren, Darth Maul. You're saying that those are people that aren't here right now. I'm not sure which point is. Alex Bogey versus Darren Wagner. Well, you see, here's the problem. So Darren was in the Navy. Alex, I believe, was in the Army. If that's if and if that's true, if Alex was Army, because he could have been Air Force. I know it was, but I think it was Army. If Alex was in the Army, I'd definitely give it to Alex. If Alex was in the Air Force, I would give it to Darren. The Trump checks. Yeah, we'll see if that ever happens. I'll believe in the Trump checks when I actually have one. The new Trump fund that he the new Trump fund that he's doing with Dell. I haven't heard about that one. And yeah, I got plaques. What's the thing with Dell? Tell me about that. Is that universal trust fund actually going to happen, or just another pipe dream? If you're talking about the checks for the savings from tariffs, that's just a pipe dream, I believe. And it doesn't make any sense, even if somehow there was enough savings from either Doge or from tariffs to say be $2,000 per person, which I don't think there is. But even if there was, wouldn't it be wiser to use that money to reduce the debt as opposed to just cutting everybody a check? Nick Reiner clearly had mental health issues. Many witnesses from Conan O'Brien Christmas party said that he was acting and talking very strange. Conan didn't want Nick to attend, but Rob insisted. Yeah, I don't know that much about it, and so I'm hoping that if it goes to trial, I hope that the trial is televised, because that would be an interesting one to watch. Well, then that hypothesis was iced, but that he was able to attend. Oh yeah, I don't know why Rob Reiner would insist that he be there. Johnny Shredder says, "Do you believe in the rapture?" No, I do not. I don't think that there is significant biblical support for the rapture. I think that there's a few verses that you can take to try to support the idea, but I don't think it's enough to build a doctrine out of, because I think it seems pretty clear that Christians will be on earth throughout the book of throughout the bad things that happen in Revelation. Merry Christmas, by the way. Thank you, Josiah. Merry Christmas to you, too. I know you're not well, but still have the money to buy Fantastic Four robot I see in the background. I'll take the ship, even it's a broken. It will give me a project to repair. It would be fun. Well, I would need again, you didn't listen to me. There are things I would need in order to make that happen, and I don't have all that right now. I'm sorry that it didn't work out. I really am. I genuinely wanted to get those ships out to people, but I couldn't. And I didn't want to be diagnosed with MS. I didn't want my financial situation to go into the toilet because of the MS. I'm sorry, Slash. Right? You may be mad that I got the Herbie robot, but the Herbie robot costs a whole lot less than the kind of 3D printing stuff that I would need, and I don't get a Herbie robot every week. Most of the stuff that I get from movie theaters is freebies. I don't have it in reach, but like the little posters and stuff. But I understand you think that I should, I don't know what, not do anything except and starve myself to death so that I can 3D print. But sorry, not going to happen. Jimmy Doolittle versus Ben Disco. Well, I mean, I don't know if Jimmy Doolittle is supposed to be Dr. Doolittle, and I don't know who Ben Disco is supposed to be, so no idea. Let's see. Trump and Dell are talking about giving $1,000 to every baby born in America, allowed to accrue interest, and they could gain access to it at 1U. Oh, it's 18 or something. Okay. Yeah, that doesn't make any sense. But whatever. It's typical. Trump says a lot of stuff like that to garner support from people because, keep in mind that a lot of the MAGA base are poor, uneducated people. And so, and this is why Trump, people, I get so angry about the fact that there are still people out there that think Trump is a conservative, right? Trump is playing every card in the Democratic playbook. And what is he doing? Hey guys, I'm going to give you free stuff. That's the Democrat playbook 100%. That's what they do every year with their elections. Is they'll say, "Hey, I'm going to give you all this. We're going to have free healthcare. We're going to have better free college education. We're going to have universal basic income. We're going to have all." That's what the Democrats do. They always try to offer more free stuff in order to get people to vote for them. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Trump is doing it, and people actually still, the man is a tax and spend liberal. And just because he, helped to overturn Roe v. Wade, they think that he's some conservative. Just because he sits there and says he's a Christian while doing everything but being Christian in his behavior, people believe him. And it's just, ugh. Sorry, it's getting chilly in here. I need to turn the heat on for a little bit. Sorry, he's calling it the Trump Fund. Well, of course he is. Because, he wants to put his name on everything possible. Trump joined top lawmakers and philanthropists Michael and Susan Dell to celebrate an extraordinary milestone for Trump accounts. Historic $6.25 billion charitable committee from the Dells. It just sounds like Trump paying off another billionaire. I'm friends with many people with different eschatologies from mine. You will be surprised. You will all be surprised when we meet each other after the rapture, lol. Well, I would say this. I would definitely be surprised after meeting someone after the rapture because that means the rapture happened. However, if the rapture does happen, I think people will be surprised to see who is there and who isn't, right? I think that the it's basically a lot of people that think that they're good, upstanding Christians, but are not behaving Christian like. For example, typical MAGA supporters, and I'm sorry, my MAGA friends out there, but if you're sitting there saying, "Oh, screw the illegal immigrants, they're all a bunch of rapists and murderers and all that," that's not a very Christian attitude, now is it? If you look at the poor people of this country and say screw them, they don't need any help, it's not a very Christian attitude about that, is it? Right now, I'm not saying that Democrats are being Christian with their overspending social programs either. In fact, what we should be doing is having the government try to make it so that it's easier for churches and stuff to help people. But we don't want to do that either. The government just wants to basically continue to be part of the problem so they can continue to discuss how the problem is the other guy's fault. Do you think the tribulation will happen in the next 20 years? I think there's a 50% chance that it'll happen in the next 20 years and a 50% chance that it will not. I would say this: when it comes to things like that, don't worry about when it's going to happen, just be ready for it. It might happen in your lifetime, it might not, but it could happen right now. It could happen in 20 years. It might not happen for 20 billion years. We do not know. And because we do not know, And people should stop worrying about it. And the funny thing is, the Bible even says, "Don't worry about it." Jesus says, "I don't even know," right? That was Jesus himself saying, "I don't even know." Now, some people say, "Oh, well, then he clearly wasn't God." Well, no, he was limited by his human form, if you will. But if Jesus didn't know and he talked to God directly, then what makes you think that some guy in South Africa figured it out? Right? So I would say, don't worry about it. Just be ready for it. Trump accounts will be available for every U.S. citizen born between January 1st, 2025 and December 31st, 2028. Well, great, but as wonderful as that sounds, I would say, well, what about people that were born before January 1st? What about somebody who was born on December 31st, 2024? That's, kind of pisses on them. What about all the people that are already struggling in this country? I'm sorry, we don't need more handouts to try and garner more votes for people. What we need, and this is at best, assuming Trump isn't just trying to destroy the Republican Party, which is still my ongoing thesis at this point. At best, this is just trying to get the next generation of voters, to vote for the legacy of Trump, because if you're 18 years old and then all of a sudden you get this huge cash windfall called the Trump Fund, and then you find, oh, Trump was this Republican president that did this. Oh, I'm going to vote for the Republicans, right? No, I'm sorry. This is just, at best, this is a scam. Do you still have a working 3D printer? Funny you should ask. So I have been actually behind the scenes talking to the company that manufactured most of the 3D printers I've attempted to use. And after much, much painful negotiations and stuff, I managed to get them to send me a printer. There we go. And there, see, it's right there, still wrapped up and not even completely unpacked yet. Hopefully, I'll have it up and running in the not too distant future. It's the same type of printer that I used to make the Stormtrooper helmet there, but that printer died shortly afterwards, and so that was supposed to be a replacement for the earlier printers. And so then, when that one went crap up, they sent me replacement parts and told me to fix this and fix that, and nothing worked. And so finally, they said, "Okay, fine, we'll send you another replacement," which I just received. So we'll see if I can get that thing up and running. Francis Dollarhide versus Buffalo Bill. Well, I actually know who Dollarhide is. That's the dude from Cowboys and Aliens. Buffalo Bill, if you're talking about the psycho killer from Silence of the Lambs, I would have to give it to Francis Dollarhide. Because funny thing is, Buffalo Bill was into skinning people and wearing their skins, and Francis Dollarhide's skin is such thick leather that I don't think it could be cut. A Trump account is a tax deferred savings account for children under 18. The accounts are designed to grow with investment earnings over time, and when the child becomes an adult, uh, and I assume this is, and Elon said it'll be a universal high income and it'll be happening in like a decade. But it does appear to be official, and there's a link to it. The funny thing about all that is that, I mean, Elon is, currently on the outs, right? I mean, Elon, don't they hate each other now? Let's see. Anyway, look at that. Landmark Dell gifts supercharges Trump accounts for America's kids. You know, the funny thing is, they even have a picture of on that link that you sent. There's a picture of Trump's signature that happens to look just like the signature from that Epstein thing. But that wasn't really his signature, right? That was fake. Uh, a Trump account, tax deferred savings account for children under 18. The accounts are designed to grow with investment earnings over time. And when the child becomes an adult, the accounts generally function like a traditional IRA. Who is eligible? Any child under 18 with a valid Social Security number can open a Trump account. Uh, what is $1,000 government contribution? The parent or guardian of a child born between calendar year 2025 and 2028 who is a U.S. citizen and has a valid Social Security number may choose to have a one-time $1,000 contribution made by the Treasury to the child's Trump account. The contribution does not count against the annual $5,000. So it's just IRAs for kids, except they want to call it a Trump account because everything Trump does has to have Trump's name on it. I'm sorry. If Obama had come up with the same thing and they called it a Barack account, Republicans would be freaking out about the narcissism involved. But whatever. Children, parents, yeah, blah blah blah. So you can, don't, yeah, you can, it's just an IRA for kids basically. And let's see. When the child turns 18, the account is treated like a traditional IRA. The account holder may continue to contribute. Yeah, so the funny thing is, it's not even like. So, yeah, just like an IRA, if the kid turns 18 and they take the money out, they're going to have to pay the same penalties you pay for an IRA unless you're over 59 and a half. So, it's just an IRA for kids. That's all it is. And the only thing is that if you happen to be born during this little 3-year window, then you get an extra $1,000 put into the account. Which is stupid because that means that a kid that opens, if you got a kid that was born last year, they can open up a Trump account, but they can't have the $1,000. So yeah, that's a bunch of crap to me. Just like Trump's recent remarks about Somalia immigrants, calling them no good trash, seems racist to me. Well, he says that about a lot of immigrants, but yeah. But again, I don't like the demonization of immigrants. I don't like that he's trying to put his name everywhere and like ingrain it into I don't you know it doesn't make any sense. Why and why aren't any of the MAGA people like standing up and noticing? That's kind of weird that he's renaming the Kennedy building with his name on it. That's kind of weird that he's setting up an IRA for kids and calling it a Trump account. What is this guy's end game? What is he trying to do? And I think he just wants everybody to love him. I think that I'm not saying he hates America, but he certainly loves himself. Guess the 3D printer has disappeared. If you'd listened to me when I told you the whole saga of what happened with the 3D printer, you would know, Slash. But instead of listening, you show up every once in a while and you accuse me of lying or defrauding you or whatever because I couldn't get the ships produced the way I wanted to which I'm truly sorry that it worked out that way, but I can't change the past. I'm sorry. I've told you that before. And if you're going to show up every once in a while for until the end of time and complain about not having your ship, you go right ahead. And I know I told people that on Patreon I was going to give them a ship. And I really was trying to do that. And it didn't work out. And I'm sorry I got sick. And I'm sorry that my life fell apart. But you know what? What do you want me to tell you? I don't know what you want, because I can't go back and make it so that I don't have MS and that it didn't drain my savings to nothing. You know, I had some, what I was doing is I was, at the time, is I was spending the money that I was getting from YouTube on the 3D printing stuff. And then when I got sick, all of a sudden I had zero disposable income, and all my savings that I did have got sucked away into, various testing and stuff like that. But, you know, people don't care about that. They just say, "What have you done for me?" Well, you know, sorry, but I'm in survival mode right now. And does that mean I get zero time for entertainment? No. But does it? But I certainly don't get to spend that much. Getting that Herbie thing was probably the single most expensive thing I bought for myself, and I don't even know how long. And I wanted to get the Galactus head, but I couldn't afford it. Francis Dollarhide versus Hannibal Lecter. I would say same problem. Francis Dollarhide has a super thick, leathery hide. Michael and his rat dog. Yes, indeed. Well, I don't know that she's a dog. I think she's like a land bat. I mean, look at that face. That is a bat face right there. He was having trouble with the last one. Not sure if he got it working. Yeah, that's why that one there is a literally just out of the box replacement. I came, showed up like just a couple of days ago, and I haven't even had a chance to finish setting it up because I drive so much trying to do Uber because I'm trying to survive. And I get that you would rather that I just spend all my time working on 3D printing projects so that I can get ships sent out to you. But you know what? I got to survive first. And so hopefully I'll be able to get that thing up and running soon. But I need to have at least a full day just to get the printer set up and calibrated and everything before I can even start test printing something. Jesus left a lot of his godly attributes when he came to earth. I'm so thankful for Jesus. Well, that's one way to put it. I don't know. And here's the problem. When it comes to, like what you just said, that's not in the Bible. I don't know that there's a simple explanation as to exactly how all that works, how Jesus came about, and how is it that he is the begotten Son of God? That's how he's described in the text. But at the same time, he is past, present, and future. Now, I have my own personal thoughts on that. But, some people would call it blasphemous to even speculate that it's anything other than their dogma. So, I tend not to get too argumentative about that kind of thing. But there's nothing in the text that says that, you know, I mean, there are some things that you can hint at. Like where Jesus says he was sent by the Father, which would kind of indicate that maybe he existed before he was begotten. But then, if he was existed before he was begotten, then he wasn't begotten, right? So I think there's a little bit of a problem there, unless you start thinking about it in a more sci-fi-y kind of way, which I've talked about in the past. But yeah. But he made a stormtrooper helmet on the table behind him. Yes. That stormtrooper helmet is the one and only good print I got off of that printer before it died. And is that dog at least a female? Yeah, but I'm not sure what you mean by at least a female. Oh, because it's wearing the frock, yes. So new 3D printer, my ship will be coming at warp speed. Yeah, sure, Slash. Obviously, you're still not listening to anything I'm saying, so yeah, whatever. I'm sure I would like to have the Reagan years back. I know that it's not going to happen. Unfortunately, there seems to be no statesmen anymore, just politicians. Unfortunately, that is very true. And unfortunately, Trump is very symptomatic of everything wrong with politics these days. And in fact, more and more, you are hearing politicians using four-letter words now since Trump came into power, and I don't think that's a good thing, right? Like Jasmine Crockett, she likes to curse sometimes. I've heard several other Republicans and Democrats cursing at both Senate hearings and in interviews with reporters. Where they're, oh, this is a bunch of BS, except they're not saying BS, they're actually saying the words. And that's not okay, guys. It really, it used to be considered uncivilized for our politicians to be saying that kind of stuff. But now we just don't care, right? And so we think, haha, isn't that great that that person dropped an F bomb? And it's like, no, that's not great. That's a bad thing. But unfortunately, a lot of people don't understand why that's a bad thing. I was talking about Francis Dollarhide from Red Dragon. Well, then I'm not sure who that is. And the Elon universal income thing is separate from the Trump accounts. Yeah, I'm not sure what the Elon universal income thing is, but you know, Elon Musk is one of those people that thinks that you can have robots do all the menial work and yet somehow not destroy the economy. You know, that's why Tesla wants to make these cyber cabs, which is funny because Tesla is still struggling to get the cyber cab to work, while Waymo's had autonomous cabs running around in cities for what, over a year now. And the big difference is that the Waymo vehicles use lidar, and Tesla refuses to use lidar because lidar is more expensive than cameras, and so that's a problem with Teslas is that they're limited by cameras, and cameras can be problematic at times. Lidar is much more effective. I personally don't like either, and I think it's disgusting that Lyft and Uber are investing millions of dollars into both Tesla and Waymo, because basically what you have is companies like Lyft and Uber are actively trying to help develop technologies that will make it so that they can eliminate their drivers. Now think about that for a second. Why would Uber want to eliminate the Uber drivers? Because then they're going to get all that juicy money for themselves. It's just plain old greed. And I think that it's a very unhealthy thing. It's a bad thing. And when you have people developing technologies with no purpose other than to eliminate jobs, what are those people supposed to do? Right? Like if all the Uber and Lyft drivers and stuff, and eventually taxi drivers, and basically every paid driver is replaced by robotic driving systems in a few years, what are those? I don't know how many hundreds of thousands or even millions of people that are currently professional drivers. What are they gonna? What are they supposed to do? Become robot technicians? I'm sorry, not everybody has what it takes to be a robot technician. What are they supposed to do? If you are the kind of person that's making a living through Uber, whether it be because you're disabled like myself or because that's just what you want to do, what are you supposed to do when Uber driving because what's going to happen is as these robot cars become more prevalent, they're not going to say, oh, we're not firing anybody. Of course not, because technically they're all contractors. They can't be fired. But what they can do is simply there's less rides, right? Because if there's 1,000 people needing a ride every day, well, if and so there, you have 1,000 people who need rides every day, and you have 100 Uber drivers, and each Uber driver gets 10 rides a day, right? Well, what happens when you put out, say, 10 robot cars, And the robot cars are not only do they are they the robot cars can work 24/7, so as opposed to a real driver can only work 12 hours a day, and so you double productivity. So now those 10 robot cars are the equivalent of 20, but you also will give them priority over the human drivers, right? So when you put in for an Uber, if things are slow, the robot car gets the ride before the human driver. And so now, all of a sudden, the you're pushing the people further and further back. So now those 100 Uber people are having to share, 80 people's worth of rides, and so they're making less money. And so some of them quit until there's a new balance, but then you start putting more and more robot cars out there, and you just get fewer and fewer human drivers. And of course, Uber loves this because that means instead of only collecting half the money, which is already too much, they collect it all. And some people think, oh, but we'll save money by having robots. Wrong answer. Right now, if you get a Lyft or an Uber that is on the robot platforms, it costs more. And what makes you think that Uber, out of the kindness of their hearts, is going to suddenly reduce their fares just because they've gotten rid of all the drivers? They're not gonna. It's just going to continue to go up. And they'll come up with whatever excuse they need to. It's just going to continue. Just like like with the tariff thing, people say, "Oh, it's so great because it's going to make American products so much easier and more affordable." Except that it doesn't. You know, it makes foreign goods more expensive, but it also. But the problem is that it's not like if you, for example, in the car market, right? Let's say that Trump put out a 50% tariff on all car imports, right? So. But not just car imports, but we'll put special taxes in place on any cars manufactured by a company that's not an American company. So sorry, Honda and Toyota and all you guys, if you have a plant in the United States, you're still going to pay extra taxes, and because of that, now a $20,000 Honda now is going to cost 25, 30,000. Do you think Ford is going to suddenly drop the price of their cars, or even keep the price of their cars the same? No, they're going to match the prices of their foreign competitors. That's what they do. And that's not a slight against Ford. Every company will do that, right? There is no reason that Teslas cost as much as they do. They don't need to. There are, like if you look at in the Chinese market, there are Chinese electric cars that are just as good as, say, a Tesla Model 3, but they cost, $8,000 to $10,000, right, instead of 30 to 50. And at the high end, you have cars that are the equivalent of the Model S Plaid, which is like 120,000 in China. Same kind of car sells for 30. And so, what would happen if you allowed China to sell cars in the United States? Well, the same thing that has happened before when foreign car companies have gotten into the U.S. markets. It would improve, and this is the problem. This is why Trump is nobody's capitalist. He's nobody's conservative. And all you people that think he is are just deluding yourselves, because capitalism is all about free trade, free markets, fair competition, right? And so that means that if somebody comes out with a new widget and it costs less than your widget, you're going to have to lower the price of your widget and improve the quality of your widget, right? That's how it works. That's what makes capitalism awesome. That's what makes it so that capitalism produces the most opportunity and the most innovation. But now we're doing the opposite. When you have cars from China that cost half of what American cars cost, instead of making the American car companies sweat it out, you just say, well, we're not going to let them sell here. And so now since you close off that competition, guess what? Now, American car companies are lazy. Why do you think you know, you know why electric cars aren't that successful in the United States? It has nothing to do with the quality of electric cars. It's because there's no real competition. If you compare electric cars here to electric cars from markets that we're not allowed to compete with, it's not even close to the same. And so if China were selling $10,000 electric cars in the United States, would what's Ford and GM and heck Honda and Toyota, what are they going to do? They're going to start figuring out a way to produce a $10,000 car to compete with it. That's what they do. Does it mean that they'll have that right away? Not necessarily. And I lived through a transition like that. In the 1970s, when gas prices shot through the roof for the first time, all of a sudden, people needed cars that got decent gas mileage because at the time, American cars were these gigantic monster tanks on wheels, and they would get like 8 miles to the gallon, right? But you had these little Datsuns coming in from Japan that could get 30 miles to the gallon, and so people, and plus the Datsuns were cheaper, so people started buying Datsun, which, for people that don't know, Datsun is now known as Nissan. So, but Datsuns were selling like crazy in the 70s, and so all of a sudden the American car companies were like, "Oh crap, we need to develop a lightweight, fuel efficient car to compete with the Datsuns." Did they do it right away? No, it took them a decade to start putting out decent, uh, you know, uh, American cars that could compete with Japanese cars as far as being fuel efficient and all that. And so, that's why in the 80s, people just said, oh, American cars suck. Well, it's because the American car companies were desperately trying to retool to develop cars that they'd never done before. Before, American cars were all about muscle and big and tough and all that. And now they had to figure out ways to be efficient because that's what was selling. And so if China was able to sell their electric cars in the United States within a few years, American car companies would start producing electric cars that would compete. But right now we're not interested in competing. We just want to shut them out and say, "Oh, it's unfair that they can make cars cheaper than us." Well, then make cars better. Universal high income is just Elon's prediction. Yeah, Elon is crazy. Just like let's see, El Shida Ministry said yesterday, we're doomed to repeat history. Unfortunately, America is doing many of the same things that led to the downfall of the Roman Empire. Well, we're also doing many of the same things that led to World War II in a country called Germany. And I'm not saying that Trump is the same as the mustache man from Germany. But if you look at the tactics used by the current administration, they are similar. Populist talk, free giveaways. With Germany, it was all about the Volkswagen and universal health care and stuff. But the now it's the Trump account and the Trump checks that are supposedly coming. All these free things that Trump's going to give you to make him popular. And of course, picking a group of people to demonize and point to them as being the source of all these problems. In the case of Germany, it was the Jews were the number one scapegoat. But basically, it became anything who was not of pure Aryan descent, right? In the current administration, it's immigrants, particularly immigrants that are not from Western European nations. And I'm not suggesting that the current administration is going to start rounding people up by sending out people in tactical gear to grab people off the streets. And oh, wait, they've already done that. I mean, they're not going to put them into, prison camps filled with hard labor and oh, they've done that too. Well, they're not going to do it with everybody. They're just going to do it with the immigrants. So, you know. Obamacare, question mark, Trump account, question mark. Obamacare is not a thing. That's the funny thing. There is nothing called Obamacare. Obamacare is the nickname given to the Affordable Health Care Act. And the funny thing is, a lot of people think the Affordable Health Care Act and Obamacare are two different things because people are dumb. But yeah, there's no such thing as a plan called Obamacare. Obamacare is just the nickname we give to something. This actually on the White House website is called a Trump account. Trump is literally naming stuff after himself. There's the account, there's the JFK Center, there's now the Trump and JFK Center. And of course, Trump's name has to go first. And by the way, how do you have the Trump and John F. Kennedy Memorial Center for the Arts when Trump isn't dead? Isn't a memorial supposed to be for someone who's dead? I mean, jeez. Deadpool versus the Mask. Well, the Mask is basically Loki, and Deadpool is unkillable. So I'd have to give it to Deadpool. An IRA for kids that started with a free $1,000 seed deposit from the government. Oh, but you only get the $1,000 seed deposit if you're born in 2025 through 2028. But that's basically what it is. But it's also just like it's not like the kids get to use it when they turn 18. It's the same rules as an IRA. You got to keep it in there for until you're 59 and a half. Who's the most evil, Hannibal Lecter, villain, Grutas, or Mason? I'm not sure who Grutas is, or Mason. If you mean Manson, Manson was a real person. Hannibal Lecter is a fictional character, and Grutas, no idea. They says, pray for Trump. I do every day. And I don't, and not in the sense like, there's hypocritical prayer and then there's genuine prayer that you should have. And what you should be doing is I genuinely pray for the well-being of the president. I pray that God will guide him in whatever he's doing and that he is doing ultimately God's will. I do not pray against him. I do not pray that, if he just sees it my way. Because for all I know, he's doing exactly what God wants him to do. And so, because I don't have direct access, I'm not the Pope, so I don't have a party line to God. So I'm just going to assume that, my job, as states in the Bible, is to pray for my leadership. And so I do. And, I do hope that he does whatever God's will is. But, when I look at the man right now, I see Antichrist. And I don't mean Antichrist like, oh, he's the Antichrist, capital A. I mean that he has the spirit of Antichrist is described in the New Testament as in someone who stands against Christian values. And the worst part is that he tries to say he is a Christian while standing against Christian values. Miss Moneypenny in the house. I guess she's done with her daily dose of cocaine, and now she is here. And Herbie is a freaking popcorn bucket. That is true. Although I've thought about trying to come up, make a model of Herbie that I could 3D print, but yeah. Not exactly extravagant. Well, to some people, I guess it is. The future is still not written. You have a printer. You can do it. There's no try. Just do. And again, when I would add if you and I know you say you already paid $150. Well, you know what? It's going to take a lot more than that to be able to ship things to people all around the world, and because it ain't cheap shipping 3D prints in a way that they won't be destroyed in the process of shipping. But it's not a priority right now. And I know you don't want to hear that, but it's not. My priority is taking care of my family, not whether or not I can get. And the thing is, I have to redesign the entire model that I came up with because it wouldn't print properly anyway. So that's a whole other thing. Johnny says, been praying for you. I appreciate that, brother. Just like recently, all the money our government gave to Israel, that money could have been used to improve many things in America. It was either 900 million or 900 billion. Well, and Israel's not the only country we've been feeding tons of money to. And the reason for that is simple. It's because the president of the United States has almost direct unilateral control over foreign policy. And so he can write a check to Israel for $900 million like it was nothing. But he can't do that with domestic policy. He still has to go through Congress for the most part. Yes, he's been trying to push executive orders, but he can only go so far with executive orders. And that's why most presidents focus on foreign policy because they can't do much with domestic. But what does that mean? It means giving lots of money to other countries. Very clearly, our elected officials aren't about America first in reality, just lip service. Oh, 100%. That's one thing that makes me absolutely, because Trump was all, I mean, if there was ever an America First candidate, it would be Trump. And yet Trump is spending hundreds of billions of dollars helping out other countries. And, you know, and then, but boy, want to cut back on spending money on the Affordable Health Care Act, make sure that everybody's paying more for their health care benefits, better cut back on Medicaid, don't want people to have any kind of health care available to them. It's just, yeah, it makes me sick. It really does. It's the Christmas season. It's better to give than to receive. Yeah, but a lot of people don't understand that. Some say the fourth man in the furnace could have been Jesus, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Sorry about the spelling. No, that's all right. Yeah, the story of Shadrach, Meshach, for those of you that don't know, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were three people who were loyal to the one true God. And at the time, Nebuchadnezzar erected a great statue of himself. He was kind of like Trump in that he was very full of himself. And everybody had to bow down and worship the statue that Nebuchadnezzar had built. And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego refused to do it, and they ended up being sentenced to burn alive in the fiery furnace. And when they were dropped into, and by the way, VeggieTales did actually a really good take on the story. The only difference is that Nebuchadnezzar made like a giant chocolate bunny statue. But anyway, when they were in the furnace, people could see a fourth person in the furnace, which is why, by the way, one of the T-shirts that I have from our church, it says "Another in the Fire." That was the name of one of our worship nights. But and so there was someone else there who is never clearly identified. But then after then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the furnace completely unharmed, even though they were in the middle of this fiery furnace. So, this is what some people argue is a Christophany. That is a pre-incarnate Christ appearance. And there are other incidents where people think it's a Christophany as well, such as when the angel of the Lord talks to Abraham before taking down Sodom and Gomorrah. But here's the interesting thing about that. Time means nothing to a being that exists outside of time, right? And we know that God exists outside of time for a few reasons. You can logically infer it just because of the fact that God created the universe, and part of the universe is time. And so, if God kicked off time, then God is outside of time. We also know that time, as far as we see it, is definitely not how God sees it. As there's a couple of places in Scripture where God says, like, a day to you is like 1,000 years to me, and 1,000 years to you is like a day to me. Basically saying the time ain't the same thing for me as it is for you. And that makes sense, right? Now, that means that, so if Christ is the truly begotten, and let's look up what that word actually even means, and we'll take a look just for fun. I know I'm going to run out of time, but I'm going to do this anyway. Helps if I can actually see what I'm typing. Let me try to do it over here. All right, so Man. Okay. Okay. So begotten. Wow. I guess there's a film called Begotten. So let's specifically look at. Okay. To beget. Typically, sometimes a man and a woman bring a child into existence by the process of reproduction, right? So, to say begotten is to say that it was brought about through a natural process of reproduction, as opposed to created, like with Adam. Now, and of course, we know that the Holy Spirit descended upon Mary, after which Mary was pregnant and found with child, and she gave birth to Jesus. So Jesus was actually conceived in Mary's womb by the Holy Spirit. And I know people like to argue that means God had sex with her, not necessarily, but somehow, you know, the conception took place, and then Mary went through the entire process of pregnancy and delivered a child, right? And so now let me look up. Let's see. I'll try to find where that particular passage is. Let's see. Okay, so yeah, the only begotten Son of God is mentioned in the most famous verse of the Bible, John 3:16. So let's go there. We'll go John 3:16. There it is. Okay, so, and of course I'm not going to sign into this, so I don't have the stupid ads. Continue. All right. All right, so let me go here and we'll switch screens and we'll take a look at this real quick. All right, so John chapter 3, if we go down to verse 16, for God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish but have eternal life. Now, this is typically written, if we look at the classic King James Version, which, by the way, this is one of the reasons I highly recommend Bible Gateway, is that you can very quickly switch between pretty much every translation. So here we go. So God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, so that whoever believeth in him should not perish. So in the NIV it says one and only Son. In this it says his only begotten Son. So let's take a look at what the actual Greek content is. And unfortunately, we have to look at it in the NIV, but we know where it was. So let's go. So 16. So it looks like, notice this. So his one and only is this word here, monogenes, which sounds like someone who is genetically follows the other person. Well, let's see what that word means. One and only, unique, one and only Son, only child. So it's not extremely. Let's see if I can find something from a external source on the meaning of that word. Let's see. Greek term, only begotten, one and only, used in the Bible, Hebrews, describe Jesus' unique relationship with God, emphasize singular divinity, though some scholars debate its precise nuance. See, only unique relationship of the physical birth combines only and kind or offspring. Let's see. trying to see if begotten is the best word for it, because it looks like term only begotten or one and only. There we go. The term rendered only begotten or one and only appears 9 times in the Greek New Testament, designating a single unique offspring. And it lists all the various usages of it. So let's take a look at the same term in context. Now, since we're jumping into this rabbit hole, let's go all the way into this rabbit hole. So we already read John 3:16. So let's look at the other verses in which the same term is used. So we go back to John 1, verse 14. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son. All right. So this is where it's talking about creation was made through the Word, and the Word became flesh and became his one and only Son, making it clear that the Word becoming flesh is also Jesus. And also in verse 18, I think it says, yeah, no one has ever seen God but the one and only Son, who is himself God and is in close relationship with the Father, has made him known. What's funny about that is that some people try to suggest that this is some kind of weird contradiction because it says nobody has seen God, but then Jesus says he is God, and people see Jesus, and therefore people see God. And Jesus even says, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father in me, and all that kind of thing. And what it's, I think, fairly obviously time. And you also have incidents in the Old Testament where people see for example, the hovering thing, God presence over the Ark of the Covenant, or God manifested himself in part to Moses, but nobody has ever seen the full glory of God, not even Moses. Moses literally saw the back of God, and it, almost killed him. So I think that's just one of those things. All right, so let's go to, okay, we already read John 3:16. There's also John 3:18, part of that same passage. If we go back to, uh, whoever believes in him is not condemned, but whoever does not believe stands condemned already because they have not believed in the name of God's one and only Son. Once again, it's right there. And so far, are we seeing something that necessarily means reproduced? Well, one and only Son, if we look at, or if we look at the word, the monogenes word, it does mono indicating one, gene is an offspring. So an offspring, so God has, many, people are called sons of God just because we're all created by God, but only once did God actually have an offspring. So I think that begotten is an accurate term, even though it's an archaic one by today's standards. Now we can look at the book. Actually, let's see. There's another one in John. It looks like John 4:9. The Samaritan woman said to him, "You're a Jew, and I'm a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for?" That can't be John 4. Oh, 1 John 4:9. That's why it didn't seem right. Okay, so we'll go there. So 1 John is written by the same guy, but is all right. So here we go. 1 John 4:9. This is how God showed his love among us. He sent his one and only Son into the world. So once again, emphasizing that Jesus is a unique offspring of the Father. All right. Let's see. Then we got Hebrews 11:17. Let's take a look at that one. Da, da, da. Hebrews 11:17. Different author this time. By faith, Abraham, when God tested him, offered Isaac as a sacrifice. He who has embraced the promises was about to sacrifice his one and only Son. So here, this is interesting. So this is talking about Abraham sacrificing Isaac, his one and only son, monogenes, same word, and as a direct comparison to the sacrifice that Christ made on the cross. So, isn't that interesting? Because obviously, Isaac was the begotten son of Abraham. All right, so then we can go to, let's see, uh, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, 60 the highest of Jesus Christ, and then 3 describe an only child. Okay, so then we have Luke 7:12. Luke 7, verse 12. Let's go down here. As he approached the town gate, a dead person was being carried out, the only son of his mother. So again, this is not a description of Jesus, but this is using that same word to describe the only child of a parent. And then we have Luke 8:42. So next chapter is 8:42. Because his only daughter, a girl of about 12, was dying. So here it's because remember, monogenes is not necessarily it's not a gender based statement. It could be a son or a daughter because it's simply only offspring. It would be the literal translation. So his only daughter, meaning the same thing. And then the last usage of it is Luke 9:38. And so 9:38. A man in the crowd called out, "Teacher, I beg you, look at my son, for he is my only child." All right. So once again, I think it's interesting because the first ones that we looked at were all references to Jesus himself, and then the last few were references to using the same word, referencing someone else's only child. So, based on all that, I think it's fair to suggest that the Bible is indicating that Jesus is not just a being created by God, because in a sense Jesus wasn't created by God, in the not in the same way that the rest of humanity was. Now, some people say, "Oh, but here's the problem we run into," and this is one of the reasons I call myself a non-sectarian Christian these days, is that many Christians will scream blasphemy if you try to suggest that Jesus had an origin at all. Because they'll say, no, you see, because Jesus is God, Jesus is, eternal in the same way that God the Father is eternal, and therefore Jesus always existed, always will exist, blah, 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 blah. And so to even suggest that there's an origin here is somehow blasphemy. I don't think so. I'm not suggesting that Jesus wasn't there at the beginning, like it says in John 1:1. What I think is that if you look carefully at this, it says very clearly that Jesus is the offspring of the Father. Now, if that's true, if Jesus is the literal offspring of the Father, that the Holy Spirit descended upon Mary, she was impregnated, and Jesus was the result. And then Jesus lived his life at 33 years old. He was executed. He, lay dead for a couple of days, and then he came back. And then he ascended to heaven. Now, you have to understand what heaven means in context, because there are different uses of the word heaven. There's actually an interesting reference where Paul says that he was taken to the third heaven, because there are actually three distinct heavens in Jewish lore. The first one is and it's actually described in Genesis, where it's the sky, right? Literally, the atmosphere of the earth is the first heaven. The second And by the way, one thing I really like about it is that the word commonly used is cosmos, but the second is what we would routinely call the cosmos today, the universe. Stars, planets, solar systems, galaxies, the whole nine. That's the second heaven. The third heaven is a place that no one until Paul and then later John, well, actually, not even John, because John didn't go to the third heaven. Paul did, but Paul seems to be the only human that has ever actually been to the third heaven. And even then, he's not entirely able to describe the experience, and he says there were things that happened there that he can't talk about. But the third heaven would be is God's domain, wherever, whatever you want to call it, another dimension, a plane of existence, whatever it is, that's where God is. And that is beyond space and time. And when Jesus ascended to heaven, we're not talking about the heaven that we're all hoping to go to after we die. That the paradise heaven is going to be just like Earth today, except without the problems. We're talking about something that was outside of space and time. And so, if you are in a temporal existence, so you're born in a specific year, a specific place on Earth, right? And so, in Jesus' time, so he was born a few years before the year zero, and in Bethlehem, right? So then he dies, somewhere around 2,000 years ago, late 20s BC, most likely, or late 20s AD, most likely. But he dies, and then goes to a place outside of space and time. The instant you are no longer bound by space and time, the past, present, future become irrelevant. They're all the same. And at that instant, then even though Christ may well have been conceived, a few years before the year zero, born a few years before the year zero, died 20 odd years after the year zero, the second he ascended, he existed for all time. He pre-existed the universe, and he will exist far beyond the universe's extinction, because he enters into a realm in which there is no time. And that's kind of hard to wrap your head around, sure, but I think it makes sense. And it also answers people like Richard Dawkins, who say, well, who created God? Well, God did. And it's in the Bible. But he didn't create him, he begot him. So in a sense, God fathered himself. Because Jesus even says he and the Father are one. And I know some people say this is modalism, and I don't care if you want to put a label on it and call it that, whatever. I'm just looking at it from a logical perspective, trying to look at things. Is that it appears that if God conceived a child, and that child then ascended to heaven and became a timeless being, then God created himself, which is kind of bizarre and weird and all that, and it's a causality loop kind of thing. But it's one that actually kind of works, because the reason that most causality loops fail, as far as why they're paradoxes, is because in order for a causality loop to work, you have to get outside of time. And that's exactly what God does. Sorry, I know, long-winded talk about something that has nothing to do with that. But anyway, so was the fourth man in the fire Jesus? Nothing in the Bible says it was, but nothing in the Bible says it wasn't. The Old Testament, and keep in mind, the Old Testament references that are possible Christophanies. At the time of the Old Testament, the name that Jesus was not known. It was so they wouldn't have said, "Oh, by the way, this is Jesus," you know. But the concept of a Messiah was known, and in fact, they had one Messiah already, and that was Moses. But they were expecting a greater Messiah in the future, and it seems to me, and I mean, I'm just going on, my poor idiot schmo self trying to look at this stuff. It seems to me that if it was meant to be that this was the Messiah in a pre-incarnate form, they would just say it, because the idea of a Messiah was a known quantity, and even in Jesus' time, the idea that Jesus descended from heaven was something that's some flowery language used. So the idea that Jesus could have existed back then, except just be called the Messiah, or, I don't see why that would be a problem. But the thing is that if Jesus and Yahweh are one and the same, as Jesus indicates, then that would mean it really is an irrelevant question, because whether or not you want to say it is God the Father or Jesus, is the same guy. So why are we even arguing about it? Nose going crazy today. Spent in Israel buys some influence in the Middle East. They used it in America as buys them nothing. Yeah, but you know what? I don't want to hear anybody tell me how Trump is all about America first when he's spending money on other countries. What was it? The billions he gave to, I can't remember. It wasn't Israel, but only trying to remember. I think it was like 40 billion. Argentina, right? So yeah, he gave $40 billion to Argentina. That's a lot of money, right? So, and don't get me wrong. Did Argentina need the money? Probably, but I would still rather it be, spent domestically. Just trying to see. No, no, no. Yeah. And let's see. Yeah. Let's see. Got my mouth washed out with soap for potty mouth, so should our politicians. Well, yeah, our politicians need to stop cursing. I don't like it, and it's just conduct unbecoming. And they just announced Tesla robotaxi is not allowed to operate without a human supervisor in Austin now. Yeah, good luck with that, guys. You know, stay out of the way. Those cars make me absolutely want to retch. Not just because it takes away my potential income, but I think of all the other Uber, Lyft, taxi, and other rideshare operators that are going to be out of a job because, Uber wants to make a few extra bucks. You know, I'm sorry, screw that noise. It makes me and the stupid thing, Trump is out there doing all these wonderful things to try and protect American jobs, and yet he won't stop the elimination of hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of jobs by robotic cars. Really? Johnny Knoxville versus Buster Keaton. Well, Johnny Knoxville's tough, but Buster Keaton would clean his clock. Elon also says LiDAR can be problematic in bad weather. It doesn't work well in precipitation. Works better than cameras. That's just patently false. Basically, look, if you have bad enough weather, it'll screw up any kind of robotic detection system, right? Whether it's LiDAR, cameras, infrared, whatever. Nothing is perfect. that that's one of the reasons that like it's very advantageous if you're conducting warfare to attack during bad weather, because radar doesn't work as well in bad weather, which lidar is actually very similar to radar. But yeah, cameras don't work. I'm sorry. If you have a backup camera in your car, try backing up when it's wet, and you tell me that the camera's not affected. Of course, eliminating those drivers means they get to keep all the money. That's the idea, and that's why I think it's disgusting. Like YouTube would prefer to cancel all the channels receiving AdSense. Yeah, YouTube would love it if they're, and in fact, that's one of the things I could just see YouTube doing this with AI eventually. Is that using AI to just generate random content and eliminate all the content creators? Right? Why not? If you can have, and the thing it's actually a viable thing, because how many content creators right now are using AI exclusively to create their content? I mean, if you search for videos nowadays, half the videos that you find are created by AI, and they're crap videos, but some of them have millions of views to them. And so, wouldn't YouTube would probably love it if they could just get rid of all the people and just have ChatGPT write them a bunch of videos, and then have Clayton put video or visuals to it or whatever, and bam. Um, so I think that's coming. I would not be surprised if in the next few years YouTube eliminates content creators. AI is about to eliminate lawyer jobs. That's really frightening to me, because the way that AI works, it would just because in California, it's actually a part of their rules that you can't use AI to generate your briefs, but some people do it anyway. And it's usually pretty obvious, because AI will simply straight up lie and create court precedents that don't exist and put them in their briefs. Hello and welcome to Johnny Cab. Yes, indeed, that's where we're heading. It's not just like it's not just that we listen to your logic. We would still have horses because of compute. Uh, I mean, the internal combustion engine would make people lose jobs. Yes, there will be job losses, but that's where he says the basic income comes into play. It'll be messy, but how do you think we got to a Star Trek type utopia? So you see, this is a great argument, except that it's completely and utterly wrong. Slash, and hear me out. Tell me what jobs were lost because cars replaced buggies. Where was there a net loss of jobs? Anywhere. Okay, maybe you could argue that horseshoe sales went down, although farms were still using horses. So the horse market was definitely reduced, but it was not eliminated. But pretty much, anybody that had a job making buggies could have gotten a job making cars, right? It's not like these are totally different things. In fact, what was the original name for the car? The horseless carriage, right? It's just carriage without the horse. The only people that lost jobs were horses. People didn't. So I don't think that it's the same, because advancement in technology I'm all for. And in fact, I'll tell you where I think these robotic cars should come into play. I am 100% in support of the development of the technology so that people with disabilities who cannot drive can have cars. I think that, like if a blind person gets a car that can drive them to the doctor, awesome. That way they don't have to depend on a ride share or a taxi or whatever. If they want to own a car, they can. And so I think that that's how it should be. Just like, there are other, like, for example, there are laws involving if you have a seeing eye dog, right? You can't, even though a business can certainly say no pets allowed, they can't say no seeing eye dogs allowed. because that's not a pet. That's something that a disabled person uses. Well, I would say the same thing with cars. Every car has to have a driver unless it's a disabled person and it's a certified disabled operations vehicle. And there, I think that's where the technology would be great. But simply having robot cars driving around so that big corporations get all the money instead of individuals, that's not the same as the development of cars over buggies. Countries are not to be ran like businesses, but they are. No, countries should not be run like businesses. They should be run efficiently, but not like businesses, because yeah, there shouldn't be. Doesn't make sense. Exactly. I grew up when the free trade agreement was implemented, and it was considered a triumph. Free trade was always the goal of the Republicans and conservatives. Free trade is the ultimate goal of anybody who's truly a capitalist. So don't give me some crap that Trump is a capitalist. He's not. He's an opportunist, but he's not a capitalist. 90 degrees minus 23.4, 66.6. Earth revolution speed 66.6 miles per hour. Earth weight 6.66 trillion tons. Okay. Except that it's 23.5. I don't know about the speed. Let's see. What is the speed of Earth's rotation? Man, I really hate that for some reason my homepage got changed. Alright. There you go. There. What's the speed of Earth's rotation? Okay, so what you were saying is speed of the revolution 66.6 miles per hour. It's actually, let's see, 1,037 miles per hour at the equator. So if it was 66,000 miles per hour, then we'd all be flung off the planet probably. But maybe you're thinking about Earth's orbit around the sun. Uh, all right. Let's see. So an average speed of about 67,000 miles per hour. Let's see if we can get something a little more precise. Because, yeah, it's not always the same speed. It depends on where you are in the orbit. Let's see. It's an average speed of 67,000. It's not six. I don't know who came up with 66.6, but that doesn't seem to be it. Uh, oh, here it is. Okay, yeah. So 66,615.96 miles per hour. So it's still not 666. I mean, if you want to say the first three digits are six, sure, but it's also not a three-digit number. But the funny thing is that that's let's see. The speed also goes as fast as 67,100 miles per hour. And so that's, yeah, the speed is just constantly moving. But I don't think that the Earth is the Antichrist, if that's what you're trying to suggest. You're deluded, man. Chinese cars are just copies. They don't innovate. They steal and use slave labor. They don't use slave labor. I've talked to Chinese citizens. People are paid. They're not paid as much as American workers are, but they are paid. And as far as not no innovation, you're wrong. I know you want to believe that, but like, okay, let me tell you something. And true story slash. Did you know? Look it up. Like 90% of 3D printers are developed and made by Chinese companies. There's very few companies, and people say, well, yeah, but Prussia's the best. Not really. Prussia's good, but they also cost a lot more, and they're prone to a lot of problems that other printers don't have. So yeah, but if you look at the bulk of 3D printers are innovated by and manufactured by Chinese corporations. People want to think that China has no innovation. That's not here's the thing. China is a hybrid communist capitalist country now. It's very interesting because they're communist in how they run things internally, but they're capitalist in how they're trying to compete with other countries, which means they're trying to develop more innovation so they can compete with others. And, you know, and I'm sorry, but you know what else is a copy? The iPhone. Nothing about the iPhone was invented by Apple. They just slapped together a few ideas and came up with the iPhone, right? The smartphone was invented by BlackBerry, and the touch screen. I don't remember who developed it, but it wasn't Apple. Everything about the iPhone was just stuff from other products lumped together, and iPhone puts it together. So yeah, absolutely, it's like it's stupid to try and suggest that even if it was a copy, that it makes it bad because everybody loves their iPhones, right? Well, I'm not saying the iPhone's bad, but it's not original. So, did China invent the electric car? No. But they sure as crap know how to make them for cheap. And you can complain about how little they pay their labor all day long, but guess what? The same thing happens in Mexico. The same thing happens in Korea. The same thing happens all over the world. Everywhere but the United States, auto workers are not paid that much. And that's why cars that are not made in the United States cost less, or at least that's a big part of it. But to suggest that slave labor is to grossly misunderstand the Chinese economy. Chinese people are paid, and in fact, the funny thing is that while like you might say, oh, but they only make $20 a day or whatever. I don't know how much they make, but however, they're also. Do you know how much their rent is? Zero. You know how much their food bill is? Zero. You know how much how much everything is? All their regular living expenses? Zero. Everything that they earn on the job is basically disposable income. Why? Because the state provides everything you need. And they have traded in China, as far as internally their system, they've traded freedom for security. Now, I'm not suggesting that we should give up our freedoms or anything like that, but a very real benefit to that is that they don't have to stress over some of the things that we stress over, but they also don't get to make certain life decisions that we get to make. So it's a trade off. But you know what? Just because you want to knock Chinese cars doesn't mean they're bad. The Datsun 240Z is almost was almost competing with the Porsche at a fraction of the cost. Yeah, the 240Z at the time was a game changer, and that's what American companies took a decade to try and catch up with. Speaking of technology advancements, Forgotten History uploaded a video yesterday. It's all about how drones have changed nowadays, how wars are fought, and have made many military tactics outdated, such as armor, troops, and so forth. Okay. Johnny says electric cars are a lot heavier than gasoline cars. I don't think our infrastructure could survive if every car was electric, parking garage, etc. Yeah, that's one of the things they like to tell you. Look, our electric car is heavier. Absolutely, I have an electric car, and it is definitely heavier than a gas car of the same class. Is it so heavy that if you parked a bunch of electric cars in a parking garage, that the parking garage is going to collapse? No. It's not that heavy. Yes, it's heavier, but you know what? If the weight difference, if the weight difference to an electric car was going to destroy the infrastructure, then the infrastructure would also be destroyed if everybody drove around in an F-150, which obviously that's not the case, because there are places where you see a lot of F-150s. Here in the South is one of them. The and as far as the infrastructure, the only infrastructure that I think would be strained if everybody went electric is the cost of electricity, or not the cost, but the production of electricity would have a difficult time keeping up. But that's where, and I was actually talking to a guy who works in the green energy market. It's kind of interesting. I was taking him to the airport. He was going to Washington, D.C. to meet with some senators. But, what we really need is better solar infrastructure, and then people can charge their cars using solar power. And we're not that far away from that being a very realistic option. Uh, I used to drive through Detroit all the time before it completely fell apart. Yeah, Detroit is definitely dead now. Well, first Japanese cars started competing and winning. Then I guess automation eliminated lots of the easy assembly line jobs. You see, if you talk about the automation of assembly lines, I'm not a, I'm mixed on some of that. The funny thing is that some of the vehicles out there that people taught as being the best vehicles in the world are handmade, right? If you look at some of the exotic sports cars, they're not made by robots. If you look at Harley Davidson motorcycles, not made by robots, right? Just because it's made by machines, that might make it cheaper, but that doesn't necessarily make it higher quality. And so you just need to figure out a way to compete, depending on, if your goal is just to make a cheap, viable vehicle, then use robots. If you want to make the highest quality product, you use people. Which is kind of funny because you would think robots would make a higher quality, or at least consistently higher quality product. But they don't. Um, I do think that wherever possible, and by the way, I understand that sometimes mechanization is necessary for an industry, and I think the assembly line is a good example of that. But I also think there are times when corporations do it just for pure greed, like what we're seeing with robotic cars and Amazon trying to robotize their entire warehouse operations and stuff like that. When I was there, they still had lots of engineers working, but the jobs that made Detroit a great city were the uneducated but well-paying assembly jobs on the floor. Well, yeah, but those jobs. Here's the thing: you still have people that work on assembly line floors. Like right next to Murfreesboro here, there's a town called Smyrna. The biggest business in Smyrna is Nissan. Right, there's a Nissan assembly plant there, and that plant employs thousands of people that work on those assembly lines. Now, yes, they have robots that do some of the work, and then you have other things that people do. It's actually a hybrid now of people versus robotic. The interesting thing is that what's surrounding that area where the Nissan plant is, and if anybody's been over there, they know about this already, but there's lots of little businesses that all they do is manufacture stuff for Nissan. So, like, there's a company that I took a guy to work the other day. He works at a company that manufactures car seats that go in Nissans, right? So, yeah. And guess what? They're all handmade. Not asking for everyone, just me. Well, you know what? You are one of everyone. So far behind with the questions. I usually am at this point, and I'm going to have to wrap it up very soon. So just, I warn you, I'm already running way late, and I got to go drive. Well, then that's because he reads them all, so no matter how silly. Yes, that is sadly true. Get a move on. I'm off to see the new Avatar movie soon. Okay, I'll tell you what, Slash, then I won't read any more of your comments because you want me to get a move on. Enjoy Avatar. I saw it on Friday. Just like the video Buddy Brown uploaded the other day, adjusted for inflation, people actually made more annually during the Great Depression than they make nowadays. The government and the economy is so broken. Yeah, but it's the best government ever and the best economy ever, according to somebody. He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. Colossians 1:15. Okay. Monogenes literally means one birth beginning, i.e., Genesis, only one human birth. His divine fullness would dwell in not a would his divine fullness would dwell in not a birth of a God. You see, the problem is what you're doing right there is inserting opinion into the text. The only thing we know is that Jesus is the one and only true Son of God. Now, if you want to argue that he had his divine nature prior to the conception, and then his divine nature was implanted into a embryo in Mary, that's fine. There's nothing that says that that's true, and there's nothing that says that that's false. Colossians 1 illustrates what Salty said earlier is it's not a contradiction. The image in Greek photo something is an exact representation, yet not the same thing as seeing the full original thing as in the photo image. Oh, okay, I see what you're saying. I might have had to read ahead in the Bible. I got caught up in the silly old House of David TV show, and now I want to find out what the Bible says about it. Good luck. House of David TV show, from what little I saw, is kind of a mess. I realized I knew about Goliath and the slingshot, but I knew nothing about the events before and after. Yeah, there's a lot to David's life that most people don't know. And it's funny, we're going to go see the David animated film this afternoon. And it's funny, some of the reviews have already said, oh, they left out the whole thing with Bathsheba. And it's like, this is a children's movie. You really want them to show David lusting after some naked woman on the roof? Most things on TV are going to be crap one way or the other. Freemasons, the Jesuits, and other false teachers making faith look bad with scams and BS on regular scammers. Well, yeah, but the problem is that TV and movies, because they're so anti-Christian, can't, there's a movie that I saw, and if you saw the short, you already know about my opinions on it, but it's called Song Sung Blue. It's the life story of a guy named Mike who went by the stage name of Lightning, and he was a Neil Diamond impersonator. And it's his basic life story, and it's a really good movie. But one thing that's kind of funny is that you watch the movie, and we talked about this. It's like their daughter in the movie, she gets pregnant unexpectedly, and the concept of abortion isn't even mentioned. She decides that she's going to give the baby up for adoption, and she finds a good couple to take the baby away when after the baby's born and stuff like that. The main character Mike has this unwavering faith that he's meant to do what he's doing and stuff, and it's like, wow, if I didn't know better, I'd swear this was the story of a Christian family. Then you watch the documentary. By the way, the documentary is also called Song Sung Blue, and you can actually watch it here on YouTube for free. And that is the true story of Mike and his family. And you find out, yes, indeed, they were a Christian family. They just leave that out of the movie. Best case is going to be lame because to get enough money to be on TV, they have to say what itching ears want to hear. Yeah, it's sadly true. Yahweh is the imminent and transcendent presence of the Godhead. All visible interactive presences are like the lion's den or pillar of fire are Christophanies of Yahweh. I would say this. That is definitely a way to look at it. But it's not. The problem that I have is I have no problem with you holding that opinion. I would have a problem with anybody suggesting that if you don't hold that opinion, that somehow it's either blasphemy or heresy or whatever, because it does not say that in Scripture. Nowhere does it say that every instance of a visible presence of God on earth prior to the conception is a Christophany. It's not mentioned at all. The idea of a Christophany is something that was done ad hoc, meaning after the fact, that we look back at it and say, oh, maybe that's what it is. And it's fine if you believe that that's what it is. It's not okay to teach that as a scriptural fact. It seems like I'm muted Shadowband already. Chat XP, stop counting. Why does everyone have to do that? My name is so offensive. Well, your name is kind of offensive, but that's all right. I remember you and I love you. And humans don't work as well in bad weather either. Well, that's true. Especially in the South. Man, people do not know how to drive when it rains. Good thing there's a moderator with 9 people here. What good is power if you don't use it? It's so churchian. Not sure what you mean there. You're not being banned. I think what you might be concerned about is that I didn't read your chats for 20 odd minutes, and that's just because I'm so far behind. See, Skynet won't be the AI attacking us with guns. It'll eliminate us through attrition. Yeah, probably. Judgment begins with the house of God. Good luck. Okay, I'm not sure what your point there is. Yeah, we just need to go through World War III and nuclear apocalypse. Yeah, that'll be great. And then horse careers, stables. Yeah, but the funny thing is that so some of those things you're right. Like the stable business went down, but you know what went up? Garages, right? So there was this change in the economy, but it wasn't that all of a sudden there were no jobs. It's that jobs transitioned from one industry to another, right? So you might have been a stable worker before, now you're a grease monkey at a garage, right? So it's just switching to another thing. You were the person, like you just said, the person that collects crap in the street, and then after it, you become the person that picks up garbage in the street. I mean, they still exist, so Hey, that's the number of the old beast. I'm not sure what you mean. Irate gamer versus the angry video game nerd. I don't know. Don't know. Irate gamer. Hospital stay 0. Yeah, talking about the Chinese thing again. Well, what most people are really doing with their freedom anyway. Well, yeah, that's the thing is that Americans, we tout our freedom like it's so awesome, and then we use it to completely destroy ourselves, to be lazy, and to not do anything with our lives, and then to bitch about the fact that other countries are doing things better than we are. And we say, but America, we're the greatest. Oh, I'm not getting up. And you're not alone in your YouTube comment. Red Letter Media did a video about AI slop and predicted YouTube would be done for within the next year. Yeah, I would not be surprised. And they're both still, oh, I don't know if they're both still active, but Josiah says they are. Robert says, I remember from last year, electric cars specifically didn't do that well where they had those severe winter weather, such as charging issues and so forth. Keep your electric cars. Okay, so there is some truth to the idea that electric cars get less range in cold weather. Right, that's true of my car. It's true of any electric car. Although newer electric cars have compensated for this by putting heat pumps into them to keep the batteries warm during extremely cold time. But it's funny because with gas cars, if have you ever like if it's really really cold and you go outside and you go to start your car and it goes and it won't turn over. Same problem. It's because cold affects batteries in a negative way. It's just that with gas cars, it's about trying to start the car. With electric cars, it's about the relative range. Now that doesn't mean the range drops to nothing. It just means that you got to be aware of it. And if you're stupid, which a lot of people are, unfortunately. So let's say you got a car that has a 300-mile range, and it's dead of winter, and it's really cold out, and so your car on that particular day is only going to get about 200 miles of range. Well, if you're stupid, you're not going to bother to keep an eye on your range and you're going to run out of juice. If you're smart, you're going to make sure during the winter, especially, that your car is fully charged every day. And like when people say, well, what do you do when you run out of a charge? The same thing you do when you run out of gas. You stop driving. So don't be stupid. And the funny thing is, people, if you have a gas car and you're down to an eighth of a tank, you're going to be like, oh, I better get to a gas station. What makes you think that an electric car, you're sitting there and you got, less than. And here's the dumb thing. And if an electric car, you can literally fill up your tank in your own garage, right? I do every night. Plug it in. Next day, I got a full charge. Do that with a gas car. Rolls Royce does dudes who paints the line down the side of the car by hand. Yeah. Metro Man versus Omni Man. I Probably have to go with Omni-Man on that one because Omni-Man. We don't really have a clear indicator to who's more powerful, but Omni-Man definitely more vicious. Pee Wee Herman versus Gilligan. Well, that's an interesting one because both are idiots that seem to accidentally accomplish things a lot. I would say this though. I think that Gilligan has survived things that would kill more people than Pee Wee. So I'm going to give it to Gilligan. Let's see. I'm sure you'd be happy to hear the Critical Drinker gave the David movie a good review. I'm really surprised. That means it'll probably suck. For $1 million, young Michael is going to fight his alternative self. Is 10 feet tall, fought dragons armed with a warhammer, and young Michael armed with a sword and shield. That makes no sense. I didn't block her. No, nobody blocked her. I think that now I'm not looking on the actual feed. I'm assuming that the the their person's chat wasn't deleted, right? Bondage Brittany. I'm assuming her chat was not like removed or anything. So let me scroll back. I can't go back that far. That sucks. Maybe preacher, street preacher, street preacher. Maybe so. Yeah. When I look on it might be a shadow ban thing for Bondage Brittany, because of the name. That wouldn't surprise me the way YouTube is. But because that's on top chat. Let me go to all chat. I really hate that. Okay. If we go to all, yeah. So if you're on top chat in the feed, you won't see Bondage Brittany's chat. But if you go to the live chat on the feed, you will see. So yeah, that it's not really shadow banned, but it is. But YouTube won't admit it, and it doesn't show up with the at. Well, if her name doesn't show up with the at, it just means she's left the chat. And she kind of indicated she was going to leave, probably thinking that she was being banned. And you see, and this is what happens sometimes. So now, and I'm not accusing Bondage Brittany of doing this, but people like the other people like Darren Wagner would do stuff like this. Is so let's say because YouTube censored her name because her name could be implied as offensive, and then she goes around to other people and says, "Man, that Salty, he just bans people that have offensive names, or his moderators ban people that have offensive names." You know, what do you do with that? You know. Just like Elon, Tesla mainly became so successful due to all the government tax breaks and incentives they received. Well, Elon's worth like what $500 billion now, and most of that is because of government contracts, right? And so I don't see Elon as the world's richest man as much as the world's biggest mooch. And Jay Leno said there are actually more horses in America now than back then because people use them for leisure. Well, people use them for leisure, plus ranches still use horses. And people were thinking that wow, horse-drawn carriages disappeared. But the thing is that horse-drawn carriages were always something that only the upper class really had. And the early days of cars, that was same true of cars as well. But then cars became a everyman type commodity over a few years. So when Elon was the head of Doge, Elon was the head of Doge, he was a hypocrite after all. He absolutely was. Here you got a guy that's sucking hundreds of billions of dollars from the government and talking about government waste. But whatever. And gas cars used to overheat all the time. Well, they still do if you don't take care of them. And by the way, you know how with a gas car, you buy the car, right? But then every 3,000 miles, you got to take it in for an oil change. And then, of course, you got to get it serviced at 30,000, 50,000, 70,000, and 100,000 miles. And of course, eventually you're going to have to replace the transmission. That's going to be a big one. And, you got to check, check all the stuff with your drivetrain. You might have to, replace the spark plugs and the alternator and all that stuff. All that, man, you talk to somebody who's got a gas car that's a few years old, and there's always something they got to take it in for, right? Guess what? None of that exists in an electric car. I put over 80,000 miles on my electric car. My maintenance cost has been one set of tires, and that is it. Because there's no oil to change, there's no radiator to flush, there's no transmission to replace. People say, oh, but if the battery goes bad, if the transmission in your regular car goes bad, you know, I'm sorry, all the horror stories you hear about electric cars are a bunch of BS, mostly propagated by people who sell gas cars. Like the dealerships don't like selling electric cars. Why? Because they want you coming in for the oil change. Man, watch where the money goes. The car manufacturers, they're fine with selling electric cars. They just want to sell product. The car dealerships, they want you to buy a gas car because they know you're going to have to come back and get your oil changed every couple of months, and you're going to have to come back and you have to get your service done every few years, and they're going to make a ton of money off of you on top of the sale of the car. But people don't see that. They just say, oh, well, electric cars explode when you plug them in. Let's see. Remember the movies of people stalling out and having to refill their radiator with water? Yep. What Hannibal Lecter content have you watched? Well, I saw the Hannibal TV series and the Silence of the Lambs, the two sequels to Silence of the Lambs, and of course what's it called, Manhunter, the original movie that Silence of the Lambs was based on. Let's see. You don't see your chats yet. If you take a look at the, if you look at the chat window, if it says top chat, you want to switch that to live chat. Oh, and yeah, you just said you always defaults to top. Yeah, it does that because they want to shadow ban people, and I don't like that. It's that's one of the things YouTube does that just makes me sick, but they do it, and there's nothing I can do about it. Yeah, it wasn't us. Lube job, yes indeed. Holy crap, 80,000 miles in how long? About 2 years. And no problem other than flat tires. Nope, not a one. Well, okay, I take that back. I did have one problem early on when I first got the car. The rear windshield wiper motor went bad, but that was covered by warranty, and they replaced it, and bam. Yeah, electric car, you really need new tires. Even the brakes last forever because. Oh yeah, that's the funny thing. I got almost 83,000 miles on the car right now. If you were to look at my brake pads, you'd think they were brand spanking new. Because even though it has disc brakes, you never use them if you drive right. So, all right. With that, I really am super duper late. I'm only going to get a few hours of drive time in, and I love talking to you guys, but I do need to make some money because I'm taking my wife out in a couple of days. I don't have any money.